Hey guys, tonight we dive into something a little quieter, a little softer, but still unmistakably Viking. No clashing swords, no blood-slicked decks, no battle cries under northern skies. Just you, a ruffled tunic, and the slow rhythm of Viking life between all that chaos. You wake up not on a dragon-headed longship, but on a flea-ridden straw mat in a longhouse that smells like fish oil and last night's fire. Outside, the fjord is cloaked in morning fog, so thick it seems to muffle the world. Seagulls shriek somewhere out there, but it's too early to care. You stretch, carefully, because your back still hurts from sleeping on wooden floorboards pretending to be a mattress. You're not alone. Around you, other villagers stir and mumble. Someone groans. Someone else knocks over a wooden bowl. A baby wails, but quickly gets hushed. The longhouse breathes slowly, heavily, as if reluctant to face another day of non-rating life. It's peaceful, in that way that life can only be when absolutely nothing exciting is expected to happen. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fog outside is the kind that swallows sound. It curls around the wooden buildings and boats like smoke, softening the hard edges of Viking life. You step outside, boots crunching over frozen earth, and pull your cloak tighter. There's a bite in the air, not quite winter, but not spring either. The kind of chill that seeps under your skin, taps your bones, and dares you to go back to bed. You don't. The fjord in the distance is barely visible through the mist, but you can hear it breathing, waves slapping gently against the shore, whispering lullabies in a language older than even the gods. It's beautiful, really, in a hope you don't die of hypothermia sort of way. You head toward the fire pit where someone's already got a pot hanging over glowing coals. It's probably porridge again. Barley, maybe oats if you're lucky. The air smells like damp wood smoke, wet moss, and whatever animal product went into this morning's meal. You accept a bowl, nodding in sleepy thanks. The porridge is steaming and bland, lumpy and a little too salty. You eat it anyway. Historians still argue whether early Norse breakfasts included more seafood or dairy. Most agree that salted herring and fermented milk were common enough, but on mornings like this, you just pray someone found a few extra berries to toss in the pot. There's a hint of something sweet. Maybe it's just your imagination trying to make porridge exciting again. You sit on a log and sip slowly. Around you, people are waking up at their own pace. A child trips over a dog. An old man curses the cold and the stiffness in his knees. Someone starts tuning a lyre with the gentle concentration of a person trying not to attract attention until breakfast is officially over. This is the side of Viking life that doesn't get memorialized in sagas. The quiet days. The in-between ones. You're not pillaging. You're not plundering. You're not even practicing your axe swing. You're just existing. And that's harder than it sounds, especially in a world where survival is a full-time job. Across the way, you see Freydis, the old healer woman, hobbling toward her hut with a basket full of dried herbs and what might be animal bones. She catches your eye and gives a nod. Her house always smells like burnt sage and secrets. She once told you not to whistle after sunset unless you wanted to summon the Watchers. You stopped whistling altogether after that. The rest of the morning unspools gently. People come and go from the longhouse. Someone tries to fix a door hinge with an old nail and a rock. Someone else yells at the chickens, who remain unimpressed. There's a rhythm here, as steady as a tide. Wake, eat, grumble, shuffle, repeat. You start a small task, maybe stacking firewood or brushing down the mud-caked boots by the doorway. Nothing dramatic, just enough to pretend you're helping while secretly watching the mist lift from the water. There's a sort of art to doing very little in a way that feels mildly productive. You're mastering it. A bird lands nearby, a ptarmigan maybe. It stares at you with the kind of judgment only birds can manage. You stare back. This goes on for longer than it should. Then someone behind you sneezes so loudly they scare the bird off. You jump. They laugh. Life goes on. There's talk of heading to the woods later. Firewood's running low again, and nobody wants to be the one caught without it when the next cold snap hits. You nod vaguely, hoping someone else volunteers first. Cutting wood sounds an awful lot like effort. Just then, Your stomach makes a noise like a dying walrus. You regret not eating a second bowl of porridge. A nearby boy offers you half a dried apple he's been hiding in his sleeve. It's wrinkled and chewy and tastes a little like dirt, but you take it gratefully. Someone starts humming a work song. Another joins in, off-key but enthusiastic. The sound floats through the fog like something sacred. Not quite music, not quite conversation, just something to fill the silence. It's comforting, like the crackle of the fire, like the softness of wool against your neck, like the fact that for once, no one's swinging a sword at your head. In the distance, a lone boat returns from an early morning fish run. You see the shape of it first, a shadow against the water, then the figures inside, bundled and hunched. There's something both hopeful and exhausting about it. You know their catch will smell terrible, and you'll have to help clean it. But for now, it's just another quiet moment in a quiet day. You stand there, bowl empty, body sore, and heart surprisingly still. This is the part of Viking life no saga sings about. The lull, the pause, the bit between the bold lines. And in some strange way, it might be the part that matters most. The porridge sits like a warm rock in your stomach as the mist begins to lift, dissolving into thin ribbons that snake along the treetops. The fjord reveals itself by inches, gray water lapping against worn stones, seaweed strewn like wet ribbon candy, and a lone gull sitting on a post like it owns the place. You shuffle your boots through the muck toward the longhouse again, not because you're needed there, but because the air smells like something marginally better than damp wool. Cooked fish. You're not particularly thrilled. It's always fish. Smoked fish, dried fish, fish paste, pickled fish. The only thing you haven't eaten is a fish that apologized to you first. But still, it beats being hungry. As you step inside, your eyes adjust to the dim glow of hearthlight and rising steam. Someone's poking at a pot of soup with the energy of a person who gave up on life halfway through chopping onions. You offer to help, which in Viking terms usually means standing nearby and watching while mumbling something encouraging like, "It smells edible." The soup is made with cod this time, boiled down with seaweed and a handful of roots that may or may not be carrots. You dip a piece of hard bread into the pot, letting it soak just long enough to avoid cracking a molar. There's a rhythm to it. Dunk, chew, stare at fire, repeat. It's weirdly soothing, like you've joined some ancient meditative practice built around not making eye contact with anyone until lunch is over. Mainstream historians agree that fish was a cornerstone of the Viking diet, particularly in coastal settlements like the one you're inhabiting now. Salted, smoked, dried. If it could be preserved, it was dinner for months. But fringe theories occasionally pop up claiming some settlements cultivated kelp and sea lettuce deliberately as a food crop. You're skeptical. If this slimy green stuff was ever cultivated, it was probably because it kept growing on everything whether you liked it or not. You're halfway through your second bowl when someone throws open the door and yells, "Net's torn again." This is neither surprising nor particularly urgent. Nets are always torn. Between sharp rocks, crabby crabs, and whatever sea monster is lurking out there just to spite you. It's a miracle anything ever gets caught. But everyone rises with a weary groan anyway. Even you. You shuffle out with the others, dragging your feet like a condemned man on the way to a moderately annoying execution. Down by the water, the net sprawls like a wounded animal, heavy with seaweed, patches missing, one entire side unraveling like it just gave up on being a net halfway through the night. You squat on a log, the damp wood soaking through your trousers immediately. Nice. Across from you, someone's already threading cord through one of the holes, tongue poking out in fierce concentration. You dig through a leather pouch and find a bone needle, smooth and warm from sitting in your pocket. Net mending begins. This is a social sport more than a task. You're not just fixing a net. You're fixing reputations, correcting gossip, and lightly roasting people who aren't present to defend themselves. You thread and pull, knot and tug, all while half listening to a story about Einar's uncle who once tried to ride a cow across a stream and ended up covered in leeches. You nod sagely and pretend that's not the third time you've heard it this month. One woman tells a tale about a sea spirit who lives beneath the fjord and steals fish unless you leave her a braid of your hair. She claims to have seen it. Long arms, eyes like clams, and a fondness for singing in the fog. Everyone chuckles, but no one outright says it's nonsense. Just in case. The work is slow but rhythmic. Pull, knot, Test the weave. Your fingers go a little numb after a while, but you keep at it. It's not the worst job, all things considered. At least you're sitting down, and no one's asking you to wrestle a goat. Yet, one of the boys, barely old enough to hold a knife properly, asks if he'll ever get to go raiding. There's an awkward pause. Someone mutters something about, when you stop falling asleep during archery practice. The boy scowls. It's a fair question, though. Not everyone in the village goes on raids. Some never do. Those left behind carry the weight of daily life. Fishing, weaving, digging, herding. It's the slow, unglamorous backbone of Norse existence. Historians still argue whether these stay-behinds had equal status, or whether returning warriors got all the glory and none of the chores. Archaeological evidence suggests shared resources and communal living were common, but sagas mostly just talk about sword stuff. No one ever tells the thrilling tale of the time someone patched a fishing net before sunset. You take a break when your back starts to ache. The sun's higher now, though still shy behind thin clouds. You wipe your hands on your tunic and squint toward the fjord. A boat is out past the rocks, dipping and swaying, its lone sailor silhouetted against the pale water. He's probably been out since before dawn. Poor soul probably skipped soup. Nearby, two older men argue about the best way to repair a torn mesh, cross-stitch or knot by knot. One insists the former is stronger. The other claims it's how Thor would have done it. You suspect neither has spoken to Thor recently. Someone starts humming again. Same tune as this morning, but slower now. The kind of tune that slides into your bones and makes your eyelids feel heavy. You blink slowly, mouth tasting like salt and soup. A nap is starting to sound very reasonable. But first, the net. You return to your patch, thread still dangling like a half-finished thought. The tide's creeping in. The gull's back on the post. And across the bay, someone has finally managed to scare the goats out of the shallows. For now, you're still rubbing the salt from your fingertips when someone calls your name. Well, not your name. Exactly. More like a nickname that started as a joke involving a dropped fish and unfortunately stuck. You sigh and turn toward the voice. It's the blacksmith's daughter, holding a net that looks like it was personally shredded by Loki in a bad mood. We're out of cord, she says, as if it's your job to magically summon more. You offer the kind of shrug that says, not my fault, but still get up to help. It's not that anyone's particularly fond of net mending. You just need a reason to avoid being volunteered for latrine duty. Inside the longhouse, someone's unraveling an old cloak to scavenge fibers. Desperation or ingenuity? Hard to say in this village. You grab a stool and sit near the fire, pretending to be extremely focused while mentally calculating how long you can stretch this before being noticed. Others join in. Old women with nimble fingers, kids who should be in archery training but are clearly hiding, and a man who claims to be a master mender but knots everything so tight it looks like you're trying to catch whales. The room fills with quiet conversation, low laughter, and the occasional ow when someone pokes themselves with a fishbone needle. This is where the real stories happen, not out on raids or at feast tables, but here, with your hands busy and your ears open. Someone leans in and starts telling the latest gossip. Apparently, Bergthora the Weaver was seen trading an extra fur blanket for a jar of honey. Scandalous, especially considering she claimed to be out of trade goods just last week. The plot thickens. You add a knot to your thread and pretend not to be deeply invested. In the corner, two older men are arguing about whether Odin prefers smoked or salted herring. This has escalated into a minor theological debate involving hand gestures and fish anatomy. One claims to have had a dream where Odin whispered, "Salt is the key." The other insists that dreams don't count unless they involve ravens. You start to wonder if the gods ever listen in on conversations like these. Maybe they're up there laughing into their mead, shaking their heads at mortals arguing about imaginary divine snack preferences. Historians still argue whether Norse religion was taken that seriously day to day. While the mythology was rich and the rituals real, much of it may have blended casually into everyday life. Half believed, half joked, entirely normalized. The line between reverence and humor was as blurred as your vision after one too many horns of ale. Back outside, you spot a familiar sight. The village cat hopping between logs with all the smugness of a creature that doesn't have to mend nets or boil soup. Her name is loosely translated as "go away," though she rarely does. She pauses to stare at you. as if evaluating your mending technique, then walks across the half-done net before flopping down in the sunniest patch. You sigh? Everyone lets her do this. No one argues with a cat that once slept on a chieftain's lap for 2 full hours. The fire crackles. A pot of fish paste bubbles ominously nearby, and someone adds a handful of chopped herbs. You have no idea what kind of herbs, but they smell faintly minty and very determined. You wonder if they'll help. They won't. As the morning turns to midday, the air grows a bit warmer, just enough to trick you into thinking it might be nice out. You stretch, rising from your stool, and feel the ache settle into your lower back like an unwelcome guest. You look at your hands, rough, red, tingling from the cord work. You think about asking someone to rub your shoulders, but that would require the sort of social capital you've yet to earn. Maybe next season. There's a call from the water's edge. Someone's dropped a basket of eels. You hear it splash, followed by a string of shouted complaints that are just barely PG-13. You join the small crowd drifting toward the commotion, half curious, half bored. A few eels are writhing in the shallows like wet ropes possessed by minor demons. A barefoot boy wades in with a bucket and heroic levels of optimism. Eel catching becomes the new village sport. People start placing bets. Someone claims touching an eel will cure headaches. Another insists it gives you nightmares. A third person tries to pick one up and gets slimed so badly they slide backward into the water. This gets a full belly laugh from a woman nearby and a slow clap from the blacksmith. No one's entirely sure if the eel fisher ever retrieves all of them. One might be hiding under your firewood right now. Try not to think about it too much. Eventually, the excitement dies down and you drift back toward your previous task. The net's mostly done. There's something satisfying about finishing it, even if you know it'll be torn again by next week. Still, in that moment, it feels like accomplishment, like progress, like you earned your lunch. The blacksmith's daughter thanks you with a nod. That's about as high as Viking praise gets. You consider making a sarcastic remark, but opt instead for a humble shrug. Maturity? Or just too tired? No one knows. Back in the longhouse, the soup has officially turned into a gelatinous mystery, and a few brave souls are scraping the bottom for crunchy bits. You pass. There's still dried fish in your pouch, and you're not feeling especially adventurous. The fire's low now. Coals pulse like sleepy eyes. People settle back into work or find corners to nap. The air smells like damp leather, seaweed, and warm breath. You lean against a beam and close your eyes for a moment. Just a moment. There's something deeply human about all this. The fixing, the gossip, the eel-related chaos. It's not glorious. It won't be sung about. But it's yours. And honestly, you wouldn't trade it for anything. Except maybe a cushion. The smell hits you before you see it. A thick, almost physical wall of salt, brine, and rotting seaweed. You've made your way back down to the shoreline, drawn by the daily ritual of hauling in the catch. Not because you love fish, but because if you're not there, someone will eventually come looking and hand you something worse to do, like scraping old soot off the roof beams with a deer scapula. The tide is out, and the exposed rocks glisten with slimy green film. You know better than to step on them. You did it once last year, landed flat on your back, and heard someone laugh so hard they nearly swallowed a fishbone. Lesson learned. The boats are back, flat-bottomed, sturdy, pulled up onto the pebbled shore like tired animals. The fishermen jump out, muscles tight and movements practiced, ropes over shoulders and baskets hoisted high. You walk up to one of them, who nods and wordlessly hands you a dripping wicker crate full of wriggling, furious fish. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest. Besides, if you carry fish, no one expects you to also carry firewood. You hoist the basket and follow the trail of others toward the processing area, a generous term for a flat patch of stones and a few wooden slabs that vaguely resemble tables. Cleaning begins. You're elbow deep in scales, slime, and the occasional confused crab. A woman next to you sings under her breath as she slits a cod open with a sharpened bone blade. Her rhythm is mesmerizing. Slice, scoop, rinse, repeat. You try to match it, but your cod has other plans. It flops, almost dramatically, like it's auditioning for a saga about heroic seafood. You look down at your tunic. It's already stained. You sigh. Somewhere in the village, there's a person who manages to stay clean during fish day. That person is either magical or lying. Mainstream historical records, especially from archaeological finds in Norse settlements, Shellfish processing was a cornerstone of village life. Coastal communities often dried fish on racks, smoked them in huts, or salted them in barrels. You've done all three, and each smells progressively worse as the day goes on. There's a fringe theory you heard once, probably from the wandering storyteller with the missing ear, that some Viking communities fermented their fish underground for months at a time. He claimed the flavor was powerful and transportive. You suspect he meant disgusting, but it's rude to say so when someone's just let you sleep in their barn. You're pulled from your thoughts by a sudden splash. Someone slipped on the rocks again. This happens regularly. It's part of the rhythm of the shore. Fish, clean, laugh at someone, repeat. You pass your full crate to a boy barely taller than it, then return for another. By mid-morning, the racks are filling. Strips of fish hang like curtains in a salty breeze, stiffening in the sun. Gulls hover above like ominous ceiling fans, waiting for a moment of distraction. You wave one away with a half-hearted curse, and it squawks like you just insulted its grandmother. You step back for a moment and look around. The village is alive in its own strange way. Kids chase each other with bits of seaweed. An old man is telling someone the proper way to gut a haddock, though he hasn't actually gutted one himself in years. A dog runs off with an entire smoked mackerel and vanishes into the trees. No one even tries to stop it. It's probably not the first time. Your hands ache from repetitive motion, and the smell of fish has taken up permanent residence in your sinuses. You splash some water on your arms from a barrel that smells like it shared too much time with cod guts. Better than nothing. Across the shore, you spot Carrie, the best fisher in the village, by popular vote and force of personality. She's arguing with someone about fish weight. Loudly. The argument escalates to the point where she slaps a particularly large herring onto a measuring board like she's slamming down a winning hand in a game of cards. You can't hear what she says, but judging by the silence that follows, she wins. You're given a new task: sort the bad fish from the good. You pretend to know the difference. Mostly it's about feel, smell, and whether or not it's glaring at you with too much intensity. You toss one particularly defiant-looking eel back into the bucket. Let someone else handle that emotional baggage. Somewhere behind you, someone plays a few notes on a flute carved from a sheep's bone. It sounds surprisingly cheerful for something invented while elbow-deep in mackerel guts. A couple of children start clapping along. The music makes it easier, somehow. The monotony fades a little, replaced by a kind of rhythm. Slap, scrape, sort, repeat. Historians still argue whether fishing roles in Viking society were strictly gendered. Evidence suggests it varied by region, season, and necessity. On days like today, everyone works. Everyone smells. Everyone swears they'll never eat fish again, and then does, later, with pickled onions and flatbread. Lunch arrives in the form of a shared pot of broth, served with hunks of dry bread and occasional laughter. Someone throws a fish head at someone else. You pretend to duck, mostly because you're too tired to move properly. The bread is dense enough to be classified as a weapon, but it fills the corners of your stomach that porridge couldn't quite reach. You lie back for a moment, head against a pile of fishing nets, and let your limbs forget what they're attached to. The breeze off the water is cool and steady. The sun is half hidden by clouds, but warm enough to coax a few of the older men into dozing right where they sit. You think about joining them, but someone just shouted your name again. Of course. Time to help carry another batch to the drying racks. You groan, rise, and trudge forward, half fish processor, half zombie. You're sticky, sore, and slightly sunburned, but you're also weirdly satisfied. You've done something real today, something necessary. And sure, your hair now smells like smoked trout and salt sweat, but in this village, that's practically a compliment. You barely make it 5 steps from the drying racks before the warm afternoon air begins to lull your body into the dangerous realm of drowsiness. Not full-on collapse, not yet, but the kind of heaviness that settles into your legs and whispers, "You've done enough. Go find a dark corner." You glance back at the longhouse, its smoke hole lazily curling a line of gray against the pale sky. The fish are strung, the nets are mended, the children are briefly not screaming. This, in Viking terms, is your window for rest. And trust me, Vikings knew how to nap. Not like warriors collapsing after battle, but more like sleep connoisseurs who could pass out on hay, boats, cloaks, or even under a rowboat flipped upside down for shade. You've tried all of these at one time or another, and you're currently eyeing your personal favorite, the hay pile near the goat pen. Warm, soft-ish, and, most importantly, far enough from other people that you might get 15 minutes of actual quiet. You head that way, dodging a chicken and stepping over a bucket that smells like regret. The hay is already half-claimed, but the top's still fluffed. You kick off your boots, flop down with a sigh that might have historical significance, and let your eyes drift shut. But here's the thing about Viking naps. They're never sacred. Not for long. You hear it before you feel it. The thud of someone else flopping onto the other end of the pile. The hay rustles. A bit of straw sticks to your cheek. Then, a low snore, not yours. You open one eye and see Torstein, half asleep and fully invading your nap zone. He grunts, turns, and mutters something about blessed silence. You consider smothering him with a cloak, then remember he's bigger than you. Still, you try. You nestle deeper into the straw, one hand tucked beneath your head, the other covering your face to block out what little sunlight filters through the thatch overhead. The breeze rustles gently, and the faint bleating of goats fades to background noise. Historians often overlook how central rest was to Viking life. The sagas talk about battles and voyages, but daily energy management? Not so much. Yet how else could they function? Between long nights, cold winters, hard labor, and frequent rowing marathons, people learned to nap like it was survival. Because it kind of was. There's even a quirky tidbit about sleeping in shifts during long voyages, where pairs of rowers would alternate dozing under their benches. Your village isn't going anywhere today, but still, the habit lingers. You rest when you can, not because you're lazy, but because you're practical. And you were almost asleep again, when a voice breaks the spell. Who stole my cloak? It's distant at first, then louder, angrier, and heading your way. You don't move. Maybe if you lie still enough, the cloak thief will be someone else today. But fate is cruel and feet are loud. A shadow blocks the sun, and a grumpy teenager glares down at you, clutching a sad, moth-eaten blanket. You took it, he says. I didn't. You mumble without opening your eyes. Technically true. You just moved it aside to fluff the hay. Semantics. He sighs, defeated, and walks off. You shift deeper into the pile, triumphant in your minimal effort defense. The sun warms your toes. You are an apex napper. But of course, Torstein starts snoring. Not cute little snores, but the kind that sound like someone gargling gravel while wrestling a bear. You reach out and nudge him with your foot. He stops. For 2 seconds. Then louder. You sit up, rub your eyes, and debate whether moving is worth it. Inside the longhouse, you know, it'll be darker, cooler, maybe even quieter. You make a tactical decision. The longhouse greets you with the smell of wood smoke and boiled turnips. A few people lounge near the hearth, eyes half closed, post-lunch haze written across their faces. One woman's draped over a bench like a melting candle. A boy's curled near the door with his head on a sheepdog. Perfect. You pick a spot near the wall, using your cloak as a pillow. The wood is hard. The ambient noise includes someone softly humming, the occasional clink of tools, and one guy softly arguing with himself over which knot is strongest. You sigh? It's good enough. As you drift, you dream. Strange, slow dreams of swimming through porridge, or sailing a boat where the oars are just long spoons. A goat appears. It nods solemnly. You wake up not because of the goat, but because a flea bites your leg. Of course. You scratch absently and check the sun through a crack in the wall. Still afternoon. Still nap time, technically. But your body's decided that was enough. You sit up slowly, bones cracking, head fuzzy. You blink around and realize everyone else is still asleep or pretending to be. There's something peaceful about it, honestly. This quiet hush where nothing needs doing right now. You live in a world of axes and ocean and endless work, but in this moment, everyone's just breathing. Historians still argue whether these moments were rare luxuries or part of a standard rhythm. Was rest rationed or ritualized? Did every village have nap hours? The sagas are suspiciously quiet on the topic, but evidence suggests that yes, after labor came pause. After chaos came calm. You step back outside. The sun has shifted, casting longer shadows across the grass. The fjord glows pale blue. Somewhere nearby, a bird calls. Not the loud, dramatic ones, but a soft, distant warble. You're not refreshed, exactly, but you're not exhausted either. And in Viking life, that's the sweet spot. The world looks slightly more tolerable after a nap. Not exciting, of course. This is still a small Norse village and not a saga, but tolerable. You step out of the longhouse, stretch like a cat who once knew ambition, and glance around to see who else is awake and pretending to be busy. Several villagers have gathered just beyond the goat pens. Not because of the goats, for once, but because it's that time of day, whittling a clock. You wander over, drawn by the twin promises of fresh air and minimal responsibility. Someone hands you a chunk of driftwood without asking. You accept it, mostly because refusing would require energy and possibly a conversation. You sit on a flat stone and pull out your favorite knife. Not the one you keep for real tasks. This one's smaller, friendlier, less threatening to your fingers. You turn the wood in your hands and start to carve with no real plan. Maybe it'll be a spoon. Maybe a vaguely fox-shaped blob. Doesn't matter. This is about the motion, not the masterpiece. Whittling, here, is a pastime of choice. It's relaxing, repetitive, and gives you just enough of a reason not to be assigned anything harder. Plus, it looks productive from a distance. You can nod solemnly and say you're refining the handle, even if the handle in question has no clear object attached to it. Next to you, a woman is making combs, beautiful ones, delicate teeth aligned like tiny ribs. On her other side, her brother is attempting to carve a likeness of their father. It looks more like a tree stump with regrets, but no one says anything. The group operates on a sacred code. You don't criticize unless it's funny. Speaking of which, someone across the circle snorts and holds up their creation, a tiny figure with exaggerated shoulders and a suspiciously familiar frown. It's clearly meant to be their neighbor, Ulf, who is sitting 5 feet away. Ulf squints at it, grunts, and then says, "My nose is bigger than that," before returning to his own project. He's making a duck. Allegedly. A few of the younger children are using their knives to peel bark into long curls and pretending they're scrolls. One child announces they're recording the laws of the village. Another insists they're writing a love poem to a turnip. No one corrects them. You find your rhythm again. Scrape, flick, turn. There's something meditative about the soft rasp of blade on wood. The afternoon breeze carries scents of pine, dried fish, and someone's sour breath. You breathe through your mouth. Mainstream historians agree that Norse people were avid carvers. Wooden objects recovered from Viking-era digs show impressive craftsmanship. Spoons, toys, chests, even entire ships adorned with swirling designs. But what the textbooks don't mention is how much of this must have been done simply to pass the time. You can only mend nets and dry fish for so many hours before your hands demand something quieter. You glance at your carving. It might be a rabbit, or a chicken, or a rabbit who made bad life choices. You call it abstract and place it carefully on your lap as if that gives it value. Someone nearby sighs. "This village is too quiet," he says. Another voice answers. You say that every time your wife visits her sister. Laughter ripples around the circle. Not mean, just teasing. It's the kind of humor that fills the cracks between chores and rainstorms. You know everyone's flaws here, and they know yours. The blacksmith has a short temper. The cooper snores like a dying moose. You have a tendency to get seasick in bathtubs. It's fine. That's how this place works, tightly knit and slightly frayed. Then comes the whinging. It starts innocently. Someone says they wish the next feast would come sooner. Another person complains about the dried apples being too chewy, which leads to a 10-minute debate over whether chewy apples are worse than sour goat cheese. This evolves into someone bringing up last year's goat cheese disaster, which was less a cheese and more a science experiment gone rogue. Historians still argue whether Viking food preservation methods were a sign of culinary ingenuity or pure desperation. You lean toward the latter, especially when remembering the time someone tried to pickle turnips by leaving them in seawater for 2 months. The result nearly ended 3 marriages and 1 unconscious chicken. As the sun shifts, shadows stretch across the clearing. You hear the faint buzz of insects rising with the warmth. Someone passes around a small pot of butter to rub into cracked hands. You accept it gratefully. Your palms look like you've been fighting squirrels. The kids eventually abandon their bark scrolls to chase one another, screaming about invisible trolls. One girl trips and gets a splinter the size of a quill. She doesn't cry, just holds it up like a battle trophy and demands someone save it for her collection. You remember being that age, running wild between the longhouses, pretending every patch of woods had secrets and every rock might be a cursed relic. You kind of miss it. You look back down at your carving. You give it eyes. Lopsided? Sure, but they've got personality. Maybe this is a fox after all. Someone nearby lets out a theatrical groan. Is it time to milk the goats again already? He asks the sky, as if hoping Thor himself will intervene. A few people begin to scatter. Chores call, however soft their voices might be. The whittling circle dissolves slowly, like fog burning off the fjord. You stand, stretch, and tuck your little wooden fox. Yes, you've decided it's a fox, into your belt. You might keep it, might trade it, might give it to the child with the troll scrolls. Depends how generous you're feeling after goat duty. And as you head back toward the village center, blades sheathed and fingers sore, you realize something. Nothing happened today. And it was perfect. You make your way toward the paddocks with the resigned gait of someone who knows the goats have already started plotting against you. It's a universal truth here. Goats know. They're too clever for their own good and far too smug about it. You walk past the same lopsided fence that's been threatening to collapse since before you were born and find that, surprise, it's still standing. Barely. Like your patience. The goat enclosure smells, well, exactly as you expect it to smell. Pungent, earthy, and somehow sour even when it hasn't rained. You squint over the fence and lock eyes with the ringleader, a shaggy, one-horned menace named Scala. Scala stares back with a look that says, "You again?" You're pretty sure he once opened a gate with his tongue. You don't trust him. Milking goats isn't hard exactly. It's just undignified. You crouch beside a docile one. Thankfully not Scala, and get to work. Warm udders, rhythmic squeezes, and the occasional tail slap to the face. One of the other milkers is humming an off-key lullaby about mead and regrettable tattoos. It's calming, in a weird, slightly sad way. Most days, this is just a quiet routine, but not always. Once, a goat knocked over a full pail, kicked someone in the shin, and then fled into the woods. It took 3 days, 2 children, and a particularly fast chicken to retrieve her. The villagers still call it the Great Goat Incident. You weren't there, but you've heard the song. Goats, of course, weren't just village gremlins. They were central to Norse rural life. Their milk became cheese, their hides turned into cloaks, and their meat. Well, let's just say that not all of them got to retire peacefully. According to sagas and archaeological finds, Viking-era farms often kept goats alongside sheep and cattle, especially in areas where harsher terrain made other animals harder to manage. Hardy little beasts, really. Insufferable, but hardy. There's still debate among scholars about just how much Viking villages relied on dairy products, especially goat milk, versus imported trade goods like fish oil or preserved grains. Some even argue that in harsher seasons, fermented milk was a major staple, not just food, but probiotic survival. You don't think about that now, though? You're mostly focused on trying not to spill anything. The kids, human ones, not goat, are running circles around the fence, pretending to herd imaginary cows. One of them yells, "I'm the cheese king," and then face plants into a pile of hay. No one helps. Someone does toss a piece of bread at him, though. It hits him square on the ear. He seems honored. After the milking comes the cleaning, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. Buckets are sloshed, hands are scrubbed with cold water, and someone inevitably gets splashed hard enough to grumble about it for a week. You scrape muck off your boots using a stick that might once have been part of a boat. Multi-purpose living. Once the last goat is released to go menace someone else's garden, you stretch and roll your shoulders. Your back creaks like old wood. Your hands smell faintly of goat and moss. It's not ideal, but it's also not the worst way to pass an hour. You squint toward the sky, judging how long until the evening stew bell. Maybe 2 hours? Maybe 1.5 if someone burns the onions again. You wander back toward the village center, where there's some mild chaos unfolding around the fire pit. A couple of men are arguing over who lost the fishing net, even though both clearly know it was the wind. The net was drying on a pole, and then, whoosh, gone, taken by a gust like a badly designed sail. Now it's somewhere in the forest, possibly enjoying its new career as squirrel bedding. You sit nearby to supervise, but don't say anything. The debate rages on with dramatic gesturing, occasional accusations of witchcraft, and the sudden inclusion of a third man who wasn't even present at the time of the incident. That's village life, No story is too small to grow legs. You hear someone mutter, "At least it wasn't the good net," which settles things. Kind of. For now. Then comes one of those small, unexpected joys. A woman shows up with a basket of freshly baked flatbreads, still warm from the oven. She doesn't say much, just sets them down and walks away. But within seconds, people swarm like flies at a midsummer feast. You're faster. You snag a piece, still hot enough to sting your fingers, and bite into it like it might solve all your problems. And for a second, it kind of does. Crispy edges, soft middle, just the right touch of salt. You let out a sigh that sounds like gratitude disguised as exhaustion. Moments like these are the glue of everyday Viking life. It's not the raids or the gods or the treasures. They're fine, sure, but it's really the bread, the shared arguments, the ridiculous goats, the sound of kids pretending to be cheese royalty. That's what holds the longhouse together when winter howls at the door. A man near the fire tells a joke about a fisherman, a seal, and a cursed cod. You don't get all of it, but you laugh anyway. It's the kind of half-funny that feels like a hug. As the sun lowers toward the trees and the sky starts to think about turning pink, you realize you've been sitting in the same spot for 20 minutes. Not thinking, not worrying, just being. A goat bleats in the distance. It might be Scala. You hope someone else is dealing with him now. You stretch, yawn, and consider your next move. Probably firewood. Maybe laundry. Maybe just a nap under the drying rack. The possibilities are endless, if you're aiming low enough. Your stomach grumbles softly. Someone nearby nods and says, "Yeah, same." Like it's a confession. And with that, you stand, dust off your tunic, and walk slowly toward whatever task awaits you next. Not because it's urgent, just because the day is moving forward, and so are you. You wander into the shade of the trees on the edge of the village, following a winding footpath that curves between rocks, mossy stumps, and roots that seem to grab at your ankles like lazy forest spirits. The plan, if you can call it that, is firewood. Everyone needs it. No one particularly wants to be the one fetching it. So you pretend you're being noble, a selfless bringer of warmth and hearth, while secretly hoping you find a decent log pile abandoned by someone else. Your axe hangs at your side, worn smooth by years of calluses. It's not much to look at, handle wrapped in old leather, head a bit chipped, but it gets the job done. Mostly, unless the wood is wet, or cursed, or both. The forest air is cooler here, and quiet in a way that makes you listen to your own footsteps. You hear a raven call above you, which might mean something or nothing depending on whether you're in a superstitious mood. You nod respectfully anyway, just in case. You're not about to be cursed by a bird today. Firewood doesn't gather itself, so you get to work. Find a downed birch tree, half rotten on one side, but good on the other. The first few swings are clumsy. Your shoulders are still stiff from the goat shenanigans earlier, but eventually, you get into a rhythm. Thwack, crack, pause. Thwack, crack, breath. There's something meditative about it, like the world shrinks down to blade and bark in effort. Historically, Norse households burned a mix of birch, pine, and alder, with birch especially prized for how cleanly it burned and how easy it was to split. Some Icelandic sagas even mention wood shortages, particularly in places where deforestation was becoming a problem, and folks had to get creative, burning peat, dung, or driftwood. Imagine warming your toes over flaming sea junk. Cozy, if pungent. Historians still argue whether the average Viking homestead relied more on forest collection or trade routes to maintain a steady fuel supply through winter. Some even suggest that communal woodcutting expeditions doubled as a kind of rural bonding ritual, like team building, but with axes and cold fingers. You haul a few good logs onto your shoulder and start the slow trudge back toward the village. It's less romantic than it sounds. Sweat sticks your tunic to your back, and a splinter works its way into your thumb. You don't curse aloud, but your face does it for you. On the way back, you pass one of the teenagers from the longhouse. She's meant to be gathering berries. Instead, she's balancing a twig on her upper lip and pretending it's a mustache. You say nothing. She nods solemnly, as if you're both part of an ancient order of forest clowns. Maybe you are. Back at the village, a small crowd has gathered near the river. You drop the wood near the fire pit and wander over to see what's going on. Turns out, it's laundry day, another quiet cornerstone of Viking life, far less glamorous than battles or banquets, but far more essential if you don't want to walk around smelling like boiled socks. You squat down beside a few others and roll up your sleeves. A wooden tub sits full of lukewarm water mixed with ashes and soapwort, a foamy plant known for its natural cleaning properties. There's a rhythm to the washing. Dunk, wring, scrub against the washboard, repeat. Someone makes a joke about how if the gods wanted people clean, they wouldn't have made mud so easy to sit in. Norse hygiene, contrary to popular myth, was actually above average for the era. Combs, tweezers, and even ear spoons have been found in archaeological digs, and records from neighboring cultures comment, sometimes with annoyance, on how often Vikings bathed. Once a week was typical, usually on Lagerdag, or bathing day Saturday. So yeah, technically, Saturday's been spa day for over 1,000 years. Still, no amount of bathing makes laundry fun. You wring out a tunic so stiff it could stand on its own and hang it on a line strung between two leaning trees. The wind catches it like a flag. A very tired, slightly moldy flag. Someone nearby is humming again. It's always the same guy, always slightly off-key, and no one tells him to stop. His voice fades into the wind, into the soft splash of water and the occasional squawk from the geese nearby. A baby starts crying, then stops, then starts again. No one reacts. It's a background noise, like birdsong or the occasional goat-related emergency. You pause, stretch your back, and look around. There's an odd beauty in it all. Not the kind of beauty that makes poets swoon or painters weep, but the kind that settles deep in your bones. Worn wooden tubs, smoke rising in curls from distant chimneys, the sharp scent of ash soap, the sound of linen slapping in the breeze. It's peaceful in a way that sneaks up on you. Then a shirt breaks free of the line and lands squarely on your head. You peel it off and glare at the sky. Somewhere, Odin is laughing. Eventually, the chores wind down. The firewood is stacked, the clothes are drying, and the scent of something cooking begins to drift from the longhouse. Onions, maybe leeks, definitely something in a big pot. You follow it like a sleepwalker. Inside, the air is warmer, thick with the smells of broth and spice. People move slowly now, tired from the day's work. Someone's carving a spoon. Someone else is mending a shoe. You take your place by the wall and exhale like you've just finished fighting a bear, even though most of your struggle involved damp socks and sap in your hair. And just like that, another portion of the day fades into the folds of memory. No great battles. No feasts. Just wood and water, soap and smoke, and the quiet satisfaction of not dropping an axe on your foot. You count that as a win. The soup bubbling in the hearth pot smells like root vegetables and salted fish, what some might call rustic and others would call, oh no, not this again. You sidle up with a wooden bowl in hand, subtly elbowing an elder out of the way, pretending it's just a coincidence. He narrows his eyes, but lets you pass. Probably because his knees are bad and you're holding a ladle. Dinner in the longhouse isn't a formal affair. No silverware, no seating arrangements, no speeches. You just find a spot and eat what you're given. You settle near the wall, using a woven basket for a seat and a chunk of bread as a spoon until it becomes too soggy to be useful, and then you eat that too. The bread's dense and chewy, with a strange but not unpleasant aftertaste. Probably rye or barley mixed with ground-up bark or beans, depending on what was available. Historians have found that Viking bread was often baked on hot stones or even inside hearth embers, leaving it with a smoky crust and the occasional surprise pebble. Dental hygiene wasn't bad for the time, but still, chew carefully. You take a cautious sip of the soup. It's hot, but not scalding, which means someone's been hovering over the pot, stirring it with care and just the right amount of passive aggression. You nod respectfully in the direction of the cook, who's already complaining that tomorrow's rations are looking thin. You offer to help catch a few fish in the morning. She raises an eyebrow, as if to say, you? Really? You pretend not to notice. Someone starts a story on the far side of the hearth, and the whole longhouse leans in. It's not an epic, no gods or dragons or boastful raids. Just a tale about a storm that blew through the valley last spring, knocking over 3 huts and one particularly unlucky outhouse. The punchline, as always, involves a goat. It gets a laugh. You laugh too, mostly because the soup has warmed your belly and it's finally safe to take off your boots. The walls of the longhouse are layered with tapestries, bright, slightly faded scenes stitched with wool thread. Battles, hunts, longships on wild seas. And then there's the one with the ox that looks suspiciously like a giant squirrel. No one ever talks about that one. Historically, these tapestries weren't just decorations. They helped insulate the room and passed on visual stories for those who couldn't read. Designs varied by region and status, and some pieces discovered in burial mounds are so detailed that modern weavers still argue about how they were made. Historians still argue whether these pieces were purely domestic art or if they held ritual significance, maybe hung only for special seasonal festivals or rites of passage. Tonight, though, they're just background, textured stories watching over a village full of tired people and clattering spoons. Eventually, you scrape the last bit of broth from your bowl and nudge it aside with a satisfied sigh. That one piece of turnip might have been a little too turnipy, but you survived. No one seems eager to move just yet. Some people pick at bits of dried fish. Others mend clothing by firelight. And a few are whispering in the corner, heads huddled close. Probably gossip, possibly scheming, maybe both. You stretch your legs, pointing your toes toward the fire. Warmth spreads into your bones, and you feel yourself getting heavier, like the logs on the hearth. Crackling, content, slowly turning to ash. But sleep has to wait a little longer. You promised the cook you'd help with fishing tomorrow, and that means prepping gear tonight. You shuffle toward the far end of the longhouse, where fishing tools hang from low rafters. Nets made from twisted horsehair, bone hooks, wooden floats. Some are well used, patched with care. Others are so old they're probably ceremonial by now, but no one wants to throw them away in case the fish gods take offense. Viking fishing methods were surprisingly sophisticated. In addition to nets and hand lines, coastal communities often used weirs, wooden fences built along tidal flows that trapped fish as the water retreated. Some settlements even used decoys or carved lures to attract eels and flatfish. Freshwater lakes and streams were a year-round resource, with ice fishing being a particularly brutal winter activity that you, thankfully, are not required to try tonight. You check the net. No tears. Hooks. Sharp enough. The little tin of bait still smells like despair. Perfect. You bundle the gear into a cloth sack and hang it by the door so you don't forget it in the morning. Not that the cook would let you forget. She's got the memory of a saga skald and the guilt-trip skills of an entire council. Someone nearby plucks a few notes on a lyre, off-key, but soothing in its own way. The fire dims to embers. A few people have already curled up in their corners, wrapped in wool cloaks or shared furs. Snoring starts in uneven patterns, soft snuffles, then a sudden chainsaw of a snort that makes even the lyre player pause. No one bothers waking the culprit. It's part of the ambience. You claim your spot, same as always, just beneath the shelf where someone once stored a barrel of pickled herring that leaked. The smell's gone now. Mostly. You unroll a blanket that still has grass stuck to it from your last nap outdoors and settle in. Outside, a breeze rustles the thatch roof, whispering through tiny cracks in the beams. Somewhere an owl calls. The air smells like smoke, wool, and something vaguely herbal, probably from that experimental tea the healer brewed earlier. She said it would cure headaches and bad dreams. It mostly tasted like dirt. You close your eyes. For a moment, everything feels still. No axes, no laundry, no goat chases. Just warmth, rhythm, and the quiet hush of a village breathing together. And just as you're about to drift off, someone sneezes loudly from the far end of the hall, and a chorus of groans follows. You smile in the dark. Just another night. The rooster is late again. Either that, or it's decided to sleep in like the rest of the longhouse. You blink awake to the low sounds of feet brushing straw, someone muttering about a missing sock, and the fire being coaxed back to life with stubborn flint strikes and equally stubborn curses. It's still early, barely light out, but fishing waits for no one, not even a sun too lazy to rise on time. You sit up slowly, your back reminding you that Viking bedding is essentially floor, but slightly less angry. You gather your gear and tiptoe over legs, furs, and a suspicious pile that might be a child or just a heap of cloaks. The door creaks open, and the morning air punches you in the nose like a damp pine-scented fist. Brisk, but refreshing. If it weren't for the wind, the icy dew, and the seagull giving you judgmental side-eye from the roof, it might even feel pleasant. The shoreline is a short walk from the longhouse, and you take it slow, stepping around puddles and half-frozen mud. A couple of others from the village are already ahead of you, one carrying a net, another lugging a wooden bucket. You catch up and exchange grunts that pass for greetings. No one's really chatty before sunrise. Vikings were, by necessity, skilled fishermen. Coastal settlements thrived on the bounty of the sea, and even inland communities relied heavily on rivers and lakes for sustenance. Cod, herring, trout, eels, all fair game. In fact, archaeologists have found fish bones in Viking refuse heaps from hundreds of miles inland, suggesting complex trade routes or very determined fishermen. Historians still argue whether dried fish was considered a staple or a last resort, but either way, it ended up on everyone's plate. You reach the water's edge and begin the morning ritual. Net gets cast. Bucket gets placed. You pretend you know what you're doing. The others pretend not to notice. A seal bobs in the distance, then vanishes like a shy guest who realizes they've arrived too early. The wind picks up, and with it, 1,000 smells. Wet moss, brine, old kelp, the faint trace of smoked fish from a neighboring village drifting across the water like culinary gossip. You breathe it all in and shiver. One of your companions offers you a spare wool cap that may have once been blue. You nod your thanks and pull it over your ears, which are starting to ache. Your first catch of the morning isn't a fish, it's a boot. Someone must have lost it months ago, and judging by the mold, it hasn't aged well. You toss it aside with dramatic flair and earn a snort of laughter. Then, finally, a tug. You pull, gently at first, then with both hands as the net resists. A wriggling silver shape breaks the surface, flapping indignantly. Success. You dump the fish into the bucket, where it flops and flails like it's personally offended. It probably is. You apologize out loud, just in case. The sea gods are notoriously petty. Fishing's not always this productive. Some mornings, you catch more cold than cod. Others, the fish jump into your net like they're volunteering. Today falls somewhere in the middle, modest success, fingers numb, nose dripping slightly. You hum a tuneless song and keep casting, the rhythm of the net a kind of meditation. At one point, someone brings out a tiny carved idol, a stubby wooden figure with a big nose and wide eyes. It's a fishing charm, meant to bring good luck or maybe just distract the sea spirits long enough to sneak in a decent haul. No one knows exactly what it's supposed to represent. Historians still argue whether these kinds of talismans were religious offerings or practical tools, like sea-scented motivational posters. Either way, you pat it gently and toss your next line. By mid-morning, the sun has decided to show up after all, stretching across the water like a lazy cat. Your bucket's half full, an acceptable result, and your nose has finally thawed enough to stop dribbling. The wind has softened, and a pair of ducks glide by, ignoring you completely. One flaps its wings and splashes your leg. You take it as a compliment. You and your companions haul in the last net, wring out your sleeves, and trudge back up the path toward the village. The ground squelches underfoot. Your boots are soaked. The cap has migrated sideways on your head. You look ridiculous, but also a little triumphant. Back at the longhouse, the cook takes one look at the fish and grunts in approval. She inspects each one like a jeweler, nodding slightly, then motions toward the prep bench. You obey without hesitation. No one wants to be on her bad side during meal prep. Cleaning fish is a task of mixed blessings. It's satisfying in a tactile, oddly primal way, but it also smells like, well, fish. Strong fish. You gut, scale, rinse. Repeat. Try not to flinch when something squirms unexpectedly. Someone brings over a bowl of herbs to add to the soup later. Wild garlic, dill, maybe some nettle. A sneeze confirms the last one. You wonder aloud if you could try smoking a few of the fish for storage. The cook squints at you, considering. It's not a no. She just wants to see if you'll actually do it right. Viking smoking methods range from open fires to specialized drying racks, depending on the region. It's a slow process, and the first step involves building a low, smoldering fire with just the right kind of wood, birch, or alder, if you're lucky. You get started. Firewood, check. Rocks to control airflow, check. Makeshift rack of willow twigs and mild optimism, double check. The smoke curls around your ankles as you hunch beside the pit. The fish hang above it like sleepy wind chimes. It smells earthy, sharp, and oddly comforting. Time slows. Smoke weaves through your hair. The air hums with quiet activity. People mending nets, chopping wood, scraping hides. No rating, no drama, just the quiet, persistent rhythm of survival. Your stomach grumbles, and you remember you haven't actually eaten since yesterday's goat soup. You steal a scrap of dried bread from your pouch and chew it thoughtfully. As you watch the smoke rise, curling into the blue, you think, for just a moment, about the vastness of the sea and how small your village must look from the cliffs. Yet here you are, part of it. Just one more slightly chilly, slightly fishy link in the long chain of everyday life.
You wipe your hands on your tunic, which, let's be honest, is now more stained than fabric, and lean back against the woodpile with a quiet grunt. The sun is starting to dip behind the tree line, casting long shadows over the fields. That golden glow has cooled into a softer, bluer hue, and the village begins to hum with the familiar rhythm of evening preparations. This, surprisingly, is your favorite part of the day. Not because anything particularly exciting happens, quite the opposite. It's the slow, almost reverent shift into rest mode. The chores are mostly done, the shouting has mellowed, and for the first time in hours, no one is running after an animal or threatening to curse a neighbor over fence lines. You take a deep breath, the air smells of moss, wood smoke, and something warm baking in someone's clay oven. Probably barley cakes. Your stomach does a hopeful little flip, despite the massive bowl of stew you already conquered. That's how you know the day's been honest. You're hungry again. You wander back toward your longhouse. Along the way, you pass the communal well, where a group of children are arguing over whose turn it is to lower the bucket. One of them is wearing a helmet far too big for his head, clearly snatched from an unsuspecting father. You pause, grin, and say, "That helmet's cursed." You know, belonged to a berserker who only ate turnips. The kid promptly throws it off with a yelp and bolts. You continue on your way, deeply satisfied. Here's a mainstream historical fact for your winding walk. While Viking helmets did exist, they didn't have horns. That whole horned helmet thing, total 19th century theatrical invention. Real helmets were often simple, practical, and rare. Most warriors couldn't afford one. Which means the kid just ran from a very historically accurate metal hat. Your longhouse greets you with creaking timbers and the smell of recently extinguished candles. Inside, it's dim but peaceful. A few embers glow faintly in the central hearth, and the warmth clings close to the floor. You crouch down to poke at the coals, tossing in a few smaller twigs to keep them alive. A low crackle answers you. Outside, a raven croaks. You pause. Not because ravens are unusual, but because this one has been hanging around a lot lately. Some say that's a sign of Odin watching. Others say it's just because Hilda keeps feeding them scraps behind the smokehouse still. As the croak echoes through the trees, you glance at the brooch shard still tucked into your pouch and wonder, was it watching when you found that? You shake the thought away. You're tired. You're getting dramatic. It happens when you've been gnawed on by goats and tricked children out of fake helmets. Instead of dwelling on ominous birds, you decide to check on your neighbor. Egil, the fisherman, lives in the longhouse next door, and while you wouldn't call him a close friend, he's the sort of person who always nods just a little too long when you talk to him. He's odd, but harmless, and lately, he's been quiet for a man who once tried to invent a fish-powered cart. You knock softly on his doorframe and call out. No answer. You nudge the door open. Inside, it's dark. No fire. No fish. No Egil. And then you see it. A set of strange carvings on the table. Not runes, at least. Not ones you recognize. Circles within circles, little lines that spiral like waves or wind currents. In the middle of it all, a dried fish with what appears to be tiny shoes on its fins. You back out slowly. Here's your quirky fringe tidbit for the evening. In coastal Viking villages, fishermen sometimes performed odd little rituals before setting sail. Some tied tiny shoes onto fish, or made offerings to sea spirits in the form of carved driftwood dolls. Historians aren't sure if this was sincere worship, local superstition, or just a particularly bored man's attempt at marine fashion. You decide Egil's probably fine. Probably just wandered off to barter with the weaver for another fish, net or a cape for his best trout. Either way, you make a mental note to keep an eye out for strange symbols, and to never accept stew from him again. The sky outside has deepened into that rich, velvety blue that only comes just before nightfall. You can see the first stars beginning to blink awake. Somewhere to the north, someone starts playing a soft tune on a lyra lullaby, probably meant to settle children who are still wide-eyed and pretending they're Viking warriors, fighting off troll attacks. You sit just outside your longhouse now, legs stretched, hands folded behind your head. The cool air settles on your skin, and your eyes drift to the distant horizon where the trees sway gently under the night's breath. Here's something scholars still argue about: whether Viking villages had formal quiet hours or whether evenings were simply naturally subdued due to darkness and the limitations of firelight. Some excavations suggest communal nighttime gatherings. Others hint at individual households retreating early, locked in their own quiet rituals. Whatever the truth, this moment, this hush is very real. You listen to it: the creak of timber, the distant strum of music, a faint rustle from a hayloft, the occasional thwack of someone swatting a mosquito with remarkable vengeance. It's not silence exactly, but it's peace. You reach into your pouch and take out the brooch piece again. Under starlight, it glints with a different kind of beauty, less gold, more silver blue. You trace its edge with your thumb. There's no rush to show anyone. No need to turn it into a tale just yet. For now, it's just a piece of a story. Yours. Waiting patiently, you tuck it away, lie back in the grass and breathe in the quiet. You have not slain any dragons. You have not raided distant shores. But you have stacked the firewood, survived the goats, confused a child, and found a mystery buried in the dirt dot, and that, somehow, feels just heroic enough. The stars are properly out now, scattered across the sky like bits of crushed bone dusted over deep velvet. You lie there a little longer, soaking in the gentle hush of the evening, until the grass starts poking into your back in a way that no longer feels poetic, just itchy. So, with a creak and a sigh, you haul yourself to your feet and step back into your longhouse. Inside, it's warmer than you remembered. The embers have caught the new wood nicely, casting flickering patterns up the beam-crossed ceiling. You take a moment to appreciate it. There's something comforting about fire, something more than heat. It makes the dark feel less endless, less cold, more like a friend leaning in close, whispering stories. You pull off your outer tunic and drape it over a peg. It smells like the whole day: smoke, hay, sheep, and victory. The victory is imaginary, but still. You stretch your arms above your head, feeling every crack in your shoulders and spine. You're not old yet, but the years are starting to keep track. The kind of tired you feel tonight, that's earned. Tired. That's I chased an angry goat through a patch of nettles. Tired. Your bed is a humble affair, just a wooden frame with a straw mattress and a thin wool blanket. But right now, it looks like a royal feast of rest. You flop down with all the grace of a sack of turnips, sending up a puff of straw dust. You cough, regret. Then you settle in again, more slowly this time. You turn your head to the side and your eyes fall on the shelf above you. A few small objects rest there. A carved wooden comb, a deer bone with notches scratched into it, your attempt at keeping track of days, maybe, and a lump of amber. You found that amber piece years ago, washed up on the shore after a storm. It still holds a faint scent of pine, and you like to imagine it was once part of a grand temple statue before the sea stole it away. Tonight, you pick it up again, holding it against the firelight. The light glows through it softly, warm and honey-colored. You roll it in your palm and wonder how many other hands has it passed through. Did someone once wear it around their neck as a charm? Did a trader carry it halfway across Europe in a leather pouch alongside spices and iron nails? Here's a historical fact to rock you gently to sleep. Vikings were traders as much as they were raiders. In fact, many Norse seafarers spent far more time bartering than battling, exchanging goods like amber, furs, soapstone, and walrus ivory all across Europe and beyond. There's even evidence they made it as far as the Islamic Caliphates and the Silk Road, where Norse coins and jewelry have been found in surprising places. But you, tonight, are not sailing to Constantinople. You are holding a thumb-worn chunk of tree sap that may or may not be magical. while mentally preparing to explain to your neighbor tomorrow why your goat was in his kitchen. You set the amber down and roll onto your side. From this angle, you can just barely see through the gaps in the wooden wall to the outside. A flicker of movement catches your eye. Someone's carrying a lantern, walking down the narrow path toward the woods. You can't see who it is, but they move slowly, deliberately. You recognize the rhythm of their steps. It's Astrid. You blink. Why would she be going into the woods at night? Astrid's your neighbor, technically. Lives in the far-end longhouse with her mother and a pair of alarmingly silent cats. She's quiet, but sharp. The kind of person who always seems to know her. Little too much about things like weather patterns, herbal salves, and where exactly the miller's son hides his extra honey cakes. You think for a moment. Should you follow? Should you mind your own business? No, obviously you're going to follow. You're a Viking. A peaceful Viking, but still. Curiosity is your most dangerous weapon. You slip your boots back on and grab a small lantern. The fire is low enough now that it won't be dangerous to leave. You creep outside, careful not to slam the door, and start walking the path she took. Here's your quirky tidbit for this moonlit detour. Some Viking communities believed that the forest was a place where the boundary between worlds living and spirit was thin. Certain glades were considered sacred, places where the gods whispered if you knew how to listen. Other times, it was just where people went when they needed to have an argument with a tree or scream into the moss. You follow Astrid's faint lantern glow through the underbrush. It's quiet, but not eerily so. The night is alive with insects, the creak of trees, and the occasional splash of something in the stream. She doesn't seem to notice you. Eventually, you reach a small clearing. In the center is a stone circle low. Flat rocks arranged in a pattern that looks accidental at first glance, but very much isn't. Astrid kneels at the center, places something small in the middle, and murmurs something too softly for you to catch. Then, without turning around, she says, "You can stop pretending to be quiet now." You freeze. "You're not very good at sneaking," she adds, more amused than annoyed. "Also, you're holding your lantern upside down." You look down. You are holding it upside down. Thankfully, it hasn't spilled yet. You shuffle into the clearing sheepishly. Astrid looks over her shoulder. "It's not a ritual, if that's what you're thinking," she says. "It's just a wish. For safe travels. For my brother." Right? You'd forgotten. Her brother joined a trading voyage 2 seasons ago. No word since. "I didn't mean to interrupt," you say. She shrugs. "You didn't." The two of you sit in silence for a long moment. The wind rustles the leaves above, and the stars blink down, ancient and unbothered. You don't say anything else, and neither does she. Not everything needs words. Here's something historians still argue about: the extent to which spiritual or magical practices were woven into everyday Viking life. Some scholars believe it was mostly ceremonial, limited to seers and special holidays. Others argue that belief in fate, spirits, and unseen forces saturated the daily fabric of Norse society. Even in the smallest gestures and quietest moments, tonight, watching Astrid place a carved stone in the center of a circle for a brother she hopes isn't lost, you lean toward the latter. The clearing isn't haunted. It's hopeful. You head back home eventually, without saying goodbye. She stays behind, and you suspect she prefers it that way. When you return, the fire has almost gone out, but your bed is still warm. You lie back down, this time for good, and you dream of amber and lanterns and stones that hum softly in the dark. You wake up before dawn barely, that soft slate blue hour when the stars haven't quite fled, and the first bird hasn't yet dared to chirp. Your eyes crack open reluctantly, one at a time, like old cellar doors. Every muscle protests. Your spine feels like it's been in a minor brawl with a disgruntled ox. But even as you groan and stretch out the stiffness, there's something oddly satisfying about the ache. It means you did something yesterday. You lived and your body kept score. You sit up slowly, blanket falling into your lap. The fire's gone out completely now, and your breath puffs in little clouds in the cool air. You wrap your tunic back around yourself, shivering slightly, and pull on your wool socks thick, scratchy, and the color of disappointment. No one spins grey wool on purpose. It's what happens when you just give up on adding joy to the fabric. You rise, stretch, and shuffle to the small wooden basin near the wall. You pour a bit of water from the clay jug beside it, splashing it onto your face with all the enthusiasm of a condemned man. It's freezing. It does the job. You're officially awake. Time for the first ritual of the Viking morning, fire lighting. You crouch by the hearth, coaxing the remaining embers like a stubborn child. A bit of dried moss, a curled shaving of birch bark, a few gentle breaths until, finally, the flames lick up the kindling with a soft crackle. You sit back on your heels, triumphant, smoky, and mildly singed. Here's your mainstream historical fact to sip with that imaginary morning tea. Vikings didn't just survive in the cold, they thrived in it. Their houses were designed for heat conservation, with turf insulation and strategically placed hearths, and despite the chilly climate, they didn't always wear fur-lined parkas. Instead, they layered tunics, cloaks, and woolen accessories. Like fashion-forward onions. You gather a bit of bread and goat cheese for breakfast, humble fare. Better than nothing. The cheese has developed a scent that might be best described as confrontational, but you take a bite anyway. You're a Viking. You've eaten worse. Outside, the village is still asleep. Smoke hasn't yet begun curling from neighboring chimneys. You step out into the dewy hush, pulling your cloak tighter against the cold. The sky is softening now, edging toward pink. One by one, the birds begin to stir. A gull screams somewhere in the distance because it is, apparently, contractually obligated to ruin serenity. You head toward the stream, basket slung over one shoulder. It's berry season, and while yesterday was full of goat chasing and potato bribery, today's list begins with something far gentler. Cloudberries. They're fickle little things. Cloudberries. Hard to find, impossible to cultivate. You've got a spot. Don't ask where they grow in shy clusters near the edge of the marsh. Golden, fragile, and just tart enough to make your teeth squeak. The walk there is peaceful. The grass is wet underfoot, and a thin mist clings to the fields. You pass by other longhouses now stirring to life. A rooster announces its opinion on the concept of rest, and a baby wails from somewhere behind a sod roof. Morning in the Viking world isn't so different from any other village. Loud, messy, and vaguely damp. Here's your quirky tidbit. Despite their rugged reputation, Vikings had an impressive sweet tooth. They used honey to make mead, yes, but also for sweetening porridge, drying fruits, and preserving berries in tightly sealed clay jars. In fact, some archaeologists argue that the Norse were sugar addicts before sugar existed. You reach the marsh just as the mist begins to lift. The cloudberry patch glows faintly in the early light, like treasure scattered across the boggy ground. You crouch low, gathering them carefully into your basket. They're delicate, bruising at the slightest squeeze, and each one feels like a small victory. And this, oddly enough, is your favorite part of the day. Not the wrestling goats or scraping dung. Not the market bartering or heated philosophical arguments about fence boundaries. But this quiet morning, damp boots, cold fingers, and sweet berries. You sit on a log when your basket is full, popping a single berry into your mouth. The taste is sharp, bright like the sky just after a storm clears. You close your eyes for a moment. It's tempting to stay here all day. Just disappear into the reeds and let the village sort itself out. But you know better. You have chores. You have people. And annoyingly you're one of them. You stand and head back toward home. Basket slung over one shoulder like a sleepy harvest goddess with mud on her boots. As you walk, you pass by a small group of children clustered around a stump. One of them waves at you enthusiastically. Another one pokes something with a stick. Is it dead? The poking child asks. Try again with a sharper stick. Another suggests. You walk faster. Back in the village proper, you notice a small gathering near the central hall. You squint. Is that a traveling merchant? You weren't expecting one until next week. His cart is piled with colorful cloth bundles, and a small crowd has already formed. You drift closer, curious. The merchant, a squat man with an impressive beard braid and a tunic that may once have been blue, holds up a bundle of shimmering cloth straight from the east. He says proudly, "Woven by the hands of Frankish angels, if you believe. The man who sold it to me, it's beautiful, and completely out of your price range. Still, you linger, fascinated by the little treasures, beads, tin amulets, dyed thread. A comb with carved runes that probably say something like 'comb responsibly.' And here's where the scholarly debate enters. Historians still argue whether Viking villages were as economically connected as some suggest, while major trade centers like Hedeby or Birkirkleali were. It's less certain how often remote farms and villages saw international goods. Were traders like this common? Or rare unicorns bearing dyed linen and dubious gossip? You lean toward common enough, at least today. You trade to jars of pickled herring and a wooden spoon for a tiny packet of dried herbs. Astrid's favorite blend. You're not sure why. Maybe because of last night's lantern walk. Maybe because you saw her earlier carrying a pail of water with that same quiet determination. She always has. You tuck the herbs into your basket, right next to the CLOUDBRIES dot. It's not much, but maybe it's enough. You head back home, your steps slower now, weighed by the soft tug of satisfaction and perhaps a tiny pinch of self-indulgence. The basket swings lightly at your side, full of morning things, berries, herbs, the faintest waft of goat lingering. Like a village perfume, you kick a pebble off the road. It startles a nearby chicken. You nod respectfully. The chicken glares, then returns to pecking the dust like you don't exist. Such is your relationship. By the time you reach your longhouse, smoke is rising lazily from several chimneys, curling up into the warming sky. The air smells like toasted barley, damp wool, and pine sap fragrant in a should I be worried about mold sort of way. You set your basket down by the door and rub your hands together, flexing stiff fingers. A thin band of sun now crosses your threshold, spilling a little rectangle of light onto the floorboards. It's going to be one of those rare, nice days. No hail, no sleet, no cursed fog swallowing children. You step inside to find one of the neighbor's kids in your chair. You blink. He waves. Your goat is on our roof again. He says without standing up. Of course she is. You squint. Did she eat the thatch? He shrugs. Only some. You sigh deeply and make a mental note to bribe the goat later with something illegal, like turnips from the communal storehouse. The kid is still sitting. Are you going to make bread? You give him the kind of look usually reserved for suspiciously wet socks, and he eventually gets up, muttering something about sharing and spirit of hospitality. You toss him a slightly bruised cloudberry. He accepts it like a royal. Tithe and disappears into the morning. You set to kneading dough you started yesterday, slapping it around the wooden bowl with the fury of someone avenging an insult. Bread making is sacred and vaguely therapeutic. You lose yourself in the rhythm: push, fold, turn, punch. The dough protests weakly, sticking to your fingers like an over-attached lover. You flour the board and try not to think about how few teeth your bread will spare. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Vikings ate a lot of bread, and not the fluffy kind. It was often made with barley or rye, and sometimes even pea flour or tree bark in lean times. Yes, bark bread. Deliciously gritty and faintly woody, like chewing a forest's bad decisions. And ovens, not every house had one. Flatbreads were, usually cooked on hot stones or in clay hearths, while richer households baked in dome ovens fueled by peat or wood. As your dough rests, you turn your attention to mending one of your tunics. A tear along the shoulder seam, probably from that brief flirtation you had with a bramble patch last week. You sit by the fire with needle and thread, tongue peeking out in concentration, as you stitch the fabric back to decency. And here's your quirky tidbit. Viking needles weren't just any old sharp sticks. They were often made of bone or bronze, and women and many men carried tiny sewing kits known as housewife rings or husfer. Functional, sure, but also fashionable. You, of course, keep your sewing supplies in a battered leather pouch shaped like a very angry fish. It's not elegant, but it's you. The The door creaks and Astrid pokes her head in. Do you have any of that mint chamomile blend? You blink. I might. Depends on how nicely you ask. She walks in fully, takes a deep breath of the bread, dough air, and raises an eyebrow. You made a child cry over chair rights this morning. He had no respect for personal furniture. She snorts so about that tea. You dig around in your basket, pull out the herbs you bought earlier, and hand them over like a merchant of com. She smiles brief, crooked. Thanks, I owe you. No. You wave her off. Just name your first goat after me. Done, she says without missing a beat, and she's gone again. You watch her go. Heart doing that stupid flutter thing it does sometimes. You press your thumb into the dough, hard, as if punishing it for your emotional vulnerability. Just then, the village horn blows once short and flat. It's not the alarm, more like a casual gathering tone. You peek out the door and spot a few neighbors heading toward the council house. You follow, curiosity pulling you along. Inside the long meeting hall, people settle onto benches and fur-covered stools. At the front, Old Leaf, the one who smells faintly of seaweed and knows everyone's birthdays, stands with his hands clasped like he's about to lecture goats on philosophy. Today's news. He begins. The stream has shifted slightly. Again, the cows are upset. Again, someone's goat is on Thora's roof again. Everyone turns to look at you. You raise your hand sheepishly. Leaf continues. And finally Tormund's son is back. From abroad, a collective murmur ripples through the room. You tilt your head. Tormund Jr. strides into the hall like a man who's just seen 5 foreign empires and decided they were all beneath him. He's wearing silk. Blue silk. His boots are polished. His hair is long and slicked back in the manner of someone who's either wealthy or about to join a traveling theatre troupe. He bows. People clap. Someone gasps, possibly at the glinting chain around his neck. You squint. Historians still argue whether returning Vikings like him were truly celebrated, or if they were mostly just viewed as awkward relatives who'd gotten to fancy. Sure, they brought tales of distant lands, new foods, different customs, but they also sometimes brought weird fashion, imperial airs, and an unfortunate tendency to speak in borrowed dialects. You lean toward mildly annoying. Tormund Jr. launches into a story about Paris, complete with exaggerated hand gestures and questionable pronunciation. You listen for a bit, but then your stomach growls. You excuse yourself and sneak back home, where your dough has doubled in size and the fire still flickers warmly. You shape the loaves and place them near the hearth to bake, settling back with a quiet sigh. Outside, Tormund is probably still describing a magnificent golden horse that was either a statue or an extremely obedient mule. You'd rather have bread. The scent begins to fill the house, curling up through the thatch like a promise. You sit near the hearth, eyes drooping. Not from exhaustion this time, just from enough. You've done enough today. Goat theft, berry triumph, rogue silk men, and still, the day's not even halfway done. You exhale slowly, stretching your feet toward the fire. Maybe, just maybe, you like this Viking life after all. The scent of baking bread swirls through your longhouse like an enchantment. You sit, one hand resting on your knee, the other absently scratching behind your ear as if the day's events have been tucked behind it. Like a secret, the fire crackles. Softly, outside, the village buzzes, but in here, it's warm still. Almost womb-like, except you're an adult Viking with opinions about tea blends and goat behavior. Eventually, the bread is done firm on the outside, soft and dense inside. With that proud, slightly lopsided shape only you can make, you break off a hunk, let the steam warm your face and take a bite. It tastes of barley sweat and mild resentment. You sigh with pleasure. Nothing store-bought or stolen from Tormund Jr.'s silk-clad pantry can compare to this. Then comes a gentle rap on the door. You already know who it is. Gudrun. She steps in carrying a bucket, trailing bits of straw and wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. Thought you might want some buttermilk, she says, setting it down. From a cooperative cow this time. You offer her bread in exchange, silent barter, older than kings. She tears off a piece and chews slowly. Still chewy, she says, smiling, "But it's honest bread." You toast her with your crust, and the two of you share a companionable silence. Just the fire, the bread, and the faint sound of your goat returning to the roof. You ever think of going raiding? Gudrun asks, not looking at you. You choke slightly. What? She shrugs. You're fit. Clever. You'd make a decent raider. Better than some of those idiots who bring home silver and foreign lice. You laugh. I get seasick walking near puddles. She raises an eyebrow. Fair. Here's your mainstream historical fact. While raiding is what most people associate with Vikings, the majority of them were farmers, fishers, craftsmen, people like you. Raids were seasonal, limited. Many Viking men never left Scandinavia at all, preferring a stable livelihood over glory. You're not a coward. You're statistically average. Still, Gudrun leans in conspiratorially. You ever want to see the world? I know someone who needs help crewing a merchant ship. Just merchandise, not swords. Is it legal? She grins. Define legal. You consider it. Thanks. But I like it here. Bread, goats, moderate peril. She stretches, stands, and heads for the door. Suit yourself, but think on it. You've got the face of someone who needs a change. Is that a compliment? I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. Then she's gone, like a breeze that smells faintly of hay and ambition. You sit for a long moment, the bread slowly cooling in your hand. A merchant voyage. That's different than a raid, right? Maybe you could sail somewhere without setting anything on fire. Maybe you could trade wool for figs or copper for stories. Historians still argue whether Vikings saw exploration and commerce as a lesser path, or merely a different one. The line between raider and trader was often blurry, especially when the same ship carried both sword and spice. But before you can overthink your entire life trajectory, you hear shouting outside. You step out and squint into the sun dot at the edge of the village. A small group has gathered. They're pointing at something or someone on horseback, riding fast along the shoreline. You jog closer, past Astrid, who's muttering "not again" under her breath, and join the crowd. The rider slows, cloak flapping dramatically. Dust billows. It's Ingmar, the scout. You haven't seen him since the ill-fated moose census. 2 summers ago. He leaps down, face flushed. A longboat's been spotted. Unknown flag. Might be friendly, might be Danes. A ripple goes through the crowd. Someone drops a basket of eels. You lean toward Astrid. So, meeting time. She nods, shield circle. Probably shouting, possibly exaggerated bravery. Of course, the elders call for a quick gathering. You stand off to the side, chewing on a crust, watching the chaos unfold. Plans are made, defensive, postures discussed. Some want to greet the newcomers with ale and open arms. Others suggest hiding in the woods and letting the goats defend the village. You, true to form, volunteer for lookout duty. High on the hill, far from shouting, just you and a horn. In case things go sideways. By midday, you're up there, sitting on a stone, watching the horizon. The longboat is closer now, sails puffed like cheeks full of secrets. You nibble dried fish and squint. No weapons drawn, no fire in sight, just a slow, deliberate approach. Your quirky tidbit: some Viking ships, doubled as floating markets. Traders, bards, healers, and even monks seeking safety from inland wars would travel the coasts. One record tells of a ship that sold nothing but fermented milk and riddles. No one knows if that's true or just a joke told by people too proud to admit they bought both. You lie back, letting the sun warm your face. The horn rests beside you. Silent. You listen to the wind, the distant gulls, the low hum of villagers pretending not to be afraid. Eventually, the longboat anchors offshore. No chaos, just flags, unfamiliar but peaceful, fluttering like hesitant hands. Someone starts singing below Anne, old travelling ballad. Others join in. You stay where you are, on the hill, watching. Because sometimes the best part of Viking life isn't the sailing or the fighting or the trading. Sometimes it's this: bread in your stomach, goat on the roof, sun on your skin, and the quiet relief of a day that didn't end in burning. The next morning begins with an unusually peaceful silence, no clanging pots, no shouts from neighbors, not even your goat stomping across the rafters. Just the soft rustle of linen as you shift under your blanket and the distant call of seabirds. Wheeling over the fjord, it's almost suspiciously quiet. You sit up slowly, bracing yourself. You've lived long enough to know that quiet in a Viking village usually means one of three things: bad weather, a funeral, or a really elaborate prank involving pickled herring and someone's trousers. You peek outside and blink. The village is deserted, or, more accurately, hiding. Tents and merchant carts are still here, but the Norse traders are gone. So are half your neighbors. Even the village dog, a scruffy brown mutt named Rollo, is nowhere to be seen. You walk around cautiously, spotting movement near the longhouse. There's Gudrun, squinting into the sun and holding something wrapped in sheepskin. "What's going on?" you whisper. She grins. "Day of the Seer." You groan. Of course, you'd completely forgotten. Mainstream historical fact: Norse society included mystics known as Volvaseeresses, or wise women, thought to commune with the gods, interpret dreams, and occasionally bless or curse someone's vegetables. When a Volva visited a village, it was a big deal. People brought offerings. Questions were asked. And if she gave you advice, you followed it even if it made no sense whatsoever. The visiting Volva today is named Tova. She's arrived with 2 apprentices, a basket of dried mushrooms, and an entourage of sheep. She wears a blue cloak embroidered with constellations, a headdress made of feathers and bones, and a necklace that might be actual vertebrae. She also smells faintly of onions. Everyone is already lining up to speak with her. Gudrun insists you come along. "It'll be good for you," she says, dragging you toward the longhouse where Tova has made her seat on a carved driftwood bench. That somehow looks both sacred and wildly uncomfortable. You don't believe in omens, really, but you do believe in avoiding social conflict. So you stand in line. People bring her questions. When will the next baby arrive? Should I sell my cow? Is it really unlucky to step on a fish facing east? Tova responds with riddles, gestures, and the occasional sharp cackle. Her apprentices translate. One of them hands out charms made of knotted wool and quartz shards. Another draws runes in ash on people's foreheads. You try not to make eye contact. Then it's your turn. You shuffle forward, vaguely hoping she'll be distracted by a dramatic sneeze or an unruly chicken. No such luck. She stares at you with cloudy eyes and then, without prompting, begins muttering. "To roads. One with fire. One with flour." You blink. She leans closer. The wind pulls you from the hearth. You will not always bake in peace. There's a pause. Her apprentice nods solemnly and offers you a small pouch of moss and dried rose hips. "For the journey," she says. You're halfway back to your cottage before you realize you're going on a journey. Gudrun thinks it's obvious. It means you'll travel. Probably soon. I don't want to travel. Doesn't matter. The winds apparently got plans. Historians still argue whether Volvas wielded real influence or were more ceremonial. Thick is part healer, part counselor, part community therapist with dramatic flair. Some believe they were revered as spiritual leaders, while others suggest they mostly kept their power by being cryptic, mysterious, and a little scary. Back home, you toss the pouch of moss onto your table and sigh. You glance at your baking supplies. You could start dough for tomorrow. You could prepare herbs for winter. Instead, you sit by the fire and wonder, what if she's right? Not about the fire or the flour, but the movement, the restlessness. You've always loved this village. You've built a quiet, relatively unheroic life. But lately, your dreams have been full of rivers you've never seen, of cities with towers made of slate, of fields where the bread tastes like stars and thunder. You shake the thoughts away. Outside, you hear laughter, children chasing a dog, someone teasing a goat yours. Inevitably, life continues, but the words linger. You will not always bake in peace. You're still mulling them over when your cousin ever shows up that evening. He's flushed, sweaty, and holding a rolled piece of sealskin parchment. There's a spot open on a merchant crew. He blurts, "They're heading east, past Gotland, toward Russ lands. They need a cook." I said you might go. You stare at him, speechless. You what? I said might. You stare harder. He shrugs. You're good. Better than most. They won't make you fight. Just cook. Maybe trade. You glance toward the corner of your house where the pouch from the seer lies. The moss inside looks like it's smirking. Quirky tidbit. Viking age cooks aboard ships were often also bartering agents swapping dried goods, exotic spices, or fermented fish for wares at every stop. A cook who could charm traders and keep rowers from mutinying over stale biscuits was worth their weight in salt. Literally, in some cases. You don't give Iver an answer right away. Instead, you take a walk to the bluff. The sea stretches out below, the longboat now barely a speck on the water. The wind catches your cloak like it's testing your wings. Travel. You think of the children, the bread, the forest skulls, the dancing frogs, all of it, and you wonder, what's waiting beyond the fjord? The sky darkens as twilight settles in, painting the waves silver. Behind you, the village glows with torchlight and supper fires. You are both of it, and somehow just beside it, close enough to smell the wood smoke, far enough to see the stars peeking through the clouds. You don't know yet what you'll decide, but tonight the wind has started whispering in your ear, and maybe, just maybe, you're ready to listen. The next morning is slower. You don't spring from your bed with purpose. You lie there, tangled in your woolen blanket, watching a spider work its way across the rafters. It's moving with more direction than you feel right now. You're not in a rush to bake, not in a rush to leave, not in a rush to decide anything, but you are thinking. You shuffle to the door, open it, and let the morning air slap your face with all the subtlety of a wet trout, cold, bracing, and just a little bit too honest. The village hums with quiet productivity, chickens scratching in the dirt, an old man adjusting his fishing net, and Gudrun carrying an entire goat like it's a mildly disgruntled scarf. Still here, she calls as she passes. Thought you'd be halfway to Novgorod by now. You smile faintly, still deciding if I want to go. She shrugs. Well, if you're going to overthink it, at least do it while chopping onions. We need stew. So you chop onions. As the knife hits the wooden board, your thoughts drift again. It would be so easy to stay, safe, familiar, predictable. But then you remember the seer's words, you will not always bake in peace, mainstream. Historical fact. Viking trading routes stretched as far as Constantinople and even Baghdad. Norse merchants didn't just sail to raid, they exchanged amber, fur, and iron for silver, silk, spices, and wine. Many non-warrior Norse folk made entire careers out of travel, trading languages and customs along the way. Still, a cook on a ship full of traders, that sounds like a logistical nightmare wrapped in a leaky wooden hull. You'd need to dry your ingredients ahead of time. Prepare portable dough. Find a way to keep yeast alive without letting it grow a second personality. And how would you even store onions without them mutinying halfway through the Baltic? Historians still argue whether Viking ships had permanent cooking setups. Some believe basic meals were prepared cold or pre-cooked onshore and eaten en route. Others suggest sailors risked tiny fires in clay pots or braziers closely watched and quickly snuffed. Either way, it wasn't glamorous, but glamour was never your goal. That night, Iver returns, casual as you like, with a smile that's 30% optimism, 70% mischief. They're leaving in 2 days. He says, last chance, you blink. They don't even know if I'm coming. They're Vikings, he says. They don't worry about details. You sit with him by the fire. He pulls out a pouch of dried apples and offers you one. The texture is like chewing regret but sweeter. Quirky tidbit. Dried apples were a common treat among Norse travelers. often strung on cords or packed into sacks alongside cured meats, flatbread, and something vaguely resembling jam made from bilberries. You chew slowly. I'd be gone for months, you say. Maybe longer. Maybe Iver agrees. And no one needs me here. You think this place falls apart without you? He grins. The bread will be flatter, sure, less poetic. But the goats will survive. You roll your eyes. It's not about goats, isn't it? You throw an apple core at him. He dodges. Barely later that night. You lie awake staring at the thatch above. You think of the bread you've baked, the children you've helped, the quiet rhythm of chopping, kneading, tending. You've built something here, but maybe there's something else waiting. A new kind of rhythm, not better, just different. The wind hisses against the shutters. You imagine it whispering possibilities, cities of stone, spices you've never tasted, breads with names that curl on your tongue like song dots. So you get up, quietly, slowly, and you begin to pack. Not everything, just enough. A small satchel, a jar of dried sourdough starter, a bundle of herbs wrapped in linen, the charm the vulva gave you, though you pretend you're just bringing it for the smell. The next morning, the village gathers to see the ship off. It's not dramatic, no horns, no speeches, no sweeping goodbyes, just quiet nods and a few muttered jokes. A child tries to sneak onto the ship and gets hauled off by one ear. You stand there, back slung over your shoulder, staring at the ship like it's a bear you're thinking about hugging. Gudrun appears beside you, arms crossed. You packed? You nod. She pulls something from her apron, a small bundle of wrapped flatbread, tied with a strip of leather. For the road, she says, and because you'll probably burn the first batch without me. You smirk. Probably. Then she does something rare. She hugs you. It's quick and slightly bony, but heartfelt. You board the ship without a big announcement. No fanfare. No fireworks. Just the scrape of boots on wood and the creak of ropes in the morning breeze. A young sailor eyes your bag. You the cook. You nod. He grins. Don't kill us with anything weird. The sail rises with a groan and a snap. The village grows smaller, then smaller still, until it's just a smudge on the coast, tucked between pines and memory. You don't look back again. Instead, you stand at the prow, wind in your face, the pouch of moss pressed against your chest like a heartbeat, and you whisper, half to yourself, let's see what kind of bread the world's been hiding. You've been at sea for 3 days. So far, you've fallen over twice, gotten sunburned on half your nose, and discovered the uniquely miserable experience of trying to chop onions on a rocking deck. Your left index finger may never trust you again. Still, you're not regretting this. Not yet. The crew is an odd collection, half traders, half warriors, all loud. They talk with their mouths full, gamble with carved bone dice, and argue constantly about the best place to get bear fat. You fit in better than expected. Sort of. You're not exactly one of them, but you're tolerated, maybe even liked. You bake flatbread over a small clay stove that Eva helped cobble together on a corner of the deck. It's laughably inefficient and smells faintly of smoke and wet dog, but the bread it produces disappears before it even cools. One trader with missing eyebrows swears your loaves cured his toothache. That's probably not true, but you accept the compliment anyway. Mainstream historical fact. Archaeological evidence confirms that some Viking ships did, in fact, carry portable cooking gear, especially when planning long voyages. Fireboxes made from clay or stone were sometimes used for basic meals, and sailors often subsisted on dried fish, porridge, or barley bread. Still, cooking at sea is mostly creative suffering. You learn how to tie down ingredients so they don't roll into the ocean. You learn to recognize the precise slosh that means your water barrel has just tipped over and is now baptizing your onions. You learn that salt air ruins your measuring instincts. Every dough turns into a surprise. You also learn how to barter. At your first port, a bustling market town that smells aggressively like fish and fermented cabbage. You trade bread for dates. The texture is strange, the sweetness addictive. You mash them into dough and call it dessert. A small child offers you a necklace made of animal teeth in exchange for a single date-filled roll. You give her two and get a toothy grin in return. Literal and figurative. Eva watches this with raised eyebrows. You planning to feed the entire continent? You shrug. Seems like they need it. Quirky tidbit. Vikings often wore decorative items made from teeth not just for aesthetics, but for protection. Some believed animal teeth could ward off evil spirits or help ensure safe travel. Others just thought they looked intimidating. Historians still argue whether these charms had spiritual purposes or were simply status symbols. Passed down through families. You wear the tooth necklace anyway. For luck. At night, you lie on the deck with your hands behind your head, watching the stars and trying not to think about how unstable your stove is. The sea rocks you in an uneven lullaby, like a drunk uncle with good intentions. Some sailors hum old songs under their breath. Others snore like walruses. It's oddly comforting. Eva joins you, chewing dried fish and offering a bite. You decline. Have you regretted it yet? He asks, voice low. You think for a second. The dried fish, yes. The journey? Not yet. He chuckles. Give it time, then. Silence. Well, not silence. There's always the wind, the creaking wood. Someone hiccuping violently in their sleep, but silence between you two. Finally, you whisper. What do you think I'll find? He doesn't answer right away. Then, flower that doesn't clump in sea air. Maybe cinnamon. You both laugh quietly, but you're thinking about it long after he dozes off, because cinnamon is a possibility. The ship is bound for a trading outpost on the eastern edge of the Baltic. From there, they'll cross overland to rivers that feed into the great cities of the east, places where spices flow like gossip and silk costs more than sheep. You imagine setting up a tiny stand in one of those cities, just a plank of wood and a warm fire. People trading silver coins for things they've never tasted. Cardamom rolls, honey dough cakes, bread that sings when you tear it open. You sigh. That's still a long way off. For now, the bread is gritty, your clothes never dry, and your hair smells like herring. But your dough is rising slowly, steadily, faithfully. It's not much, but it's yours. The next day, your stove tips again. You stare down at your dough, now stuck to the deck like an unfortunate jellyfish. The crew laughs. You sigh, scrape it up and start over. The sea doesn't apologize. And neither do you. By now, you've become someone else. Not entirely. You still flinch when someone sharpens a blade too loudly. You still duck when the sails snap unexpectedly. You still whisper to your dough when no one's listening. But you've changed. Your arms are stronger, hauling water, mixing flour, anchoring pots. Your skin is rougher, weathered by wind and sea. Your sense of direction now relies more on cloud shapes than street signs. And your dreams? They're full of rolling decks and fire-roasted grain. You're still baking, still bartering, still somehow surviving. And today, you dock. The port is bigger than you expected. There are tall wooden palisades, guard towers with men holding spears, and long lines of traders hauling crates, barrels, goats, and every kind of pungent fish imaginable. The air smells like ambition and overripe fruit. A child walks by dragging a goose on a string. You clutch your basket of baked goods a little tighter. The crew fans out quickly, off to handle their own trades. You've got a plan. You've been working on your pitch all week. Viking bread baked with sea salt and stories. It's terrible and you know it, but it makes you laugh. You set up shop near the edge of the market, just a small cloth on the ground, and a clay bowl filled with small rolls. A few are plain. One batch has crushed berries. The last one's your favorite, are spiced with something vaguely citrusy that you borrowed from a crate labeled property of Bjorn. A man approaches. He's old, possibly part moss. He stares at your bread like it's grown teeth. Then he picks one up, sniffs it, and bites. He doesn't speak. He just hands you a handful of dried orange peels and walks away. Quirky tidbit: in Viking trading posts, barter was far more common than currency objects like amber, furs, dried herbs. Even pine resin could be traded for food, metalwork, or tools. Some records even suggest people bartered for goods using honeycombs and squirrel pelts. Historians still argue whether standard exchange rates ever existed or if it was all just a chaotic you get what you can kind of system. Your next customer is a woman in a cloak far nicer than yours. She eyes the bread, sniffs theatrically, then leans in. Did you bake this yourself? You nod. And what's in it? Barley flour, salt love, mild regret, and a touch of possibly orange peel. She considers, then, I'll trade. You this fine carved spoon for 2. You blink. Deal. And that's how it goes. You're not rich by the end of the day, but you've got a handful of things, a spoon, a sprig of rosemary, an oiled cloth that smells like tallow, and most bizarrely a drawing of a bear in a hat. You're not sure what that one was for, but it's yours now, ever finds you at sunset, sitting behind your mostly empty cloth and gnawing on a crust. You did all right, he says. You shrug, made enough to not starve tomorrow. That's the Viking dream. Mainstream historical fact. Trade was central to Viking life, not just raiding. Norse merchants travelled widely, establishing routes stretching from the British Isles to Constantinople and even the Middle East. They dealt in everything from walrus ivory and soapstone to silks, and spices brought back from the East. Some of the most powerful Vikings were known more for what they brought home than what they conquered. You pack up your cloth, tuck your spoon into your belt, and follow Ivar back to the ship. The air is cooler now, the sea a chimera. That night, you lie on the deck again, staring up at the stars. You're too tired to bake, to full to complain, and a little voice inside you whispers something dangerous. Maybe. You're good at this, Dot, not just the bread but the life, this wandering, bartering, baking, burning your fingers kind of life. You remember your village, the quiet streets, the smell of hearth smoke, the well-worn path to your garden. It was calm, predictable, safe. But this is full of uncertainty and wave slap, and sticky orange peels, and it's yours. You fall asleep with your hand still curled around the carved spoon. You wake to the sound of chickens. Not roosters, no noble crowing here. Just chickens. Loud, peckish, mildly offended chickens clucking somewhere below deck. You're still not sure who brought them on board or how they survived the salt air. But they've become part of ship life now, like barnacles or Ivar's questionable singing voice. The sails are up, the crew already stirring, and someone's muttering about wind direction like it's a divine riddle. You sit up slowly, bones popping, like wet twigs, and rub your eyes with the sleeve of your cloak. The carved spoon rolls out from under you and clatters across the deck. Good morning. The ship is leaving the trading port behind, pushing toward a stretch of coast you've never seen. No one tells you where you're going, not because it's a secret, but because nobody knows. We'll know when we see it, says the helmsman with a grin missing to teeth. Comforting. You sit cross-legged, chewing the last of your salted flatbread, and watch the world roll past. The horizon is smeared with pale grey and low mist, like the edge of a dream you forgot. You wonder, idly, if it's ever not foggy in this part of the world. Probably not. There's no urgent task for you today. No fire to tend, no baking to rush. So instead, you mend your cloak with thread you traded for back at the port. The stitches are uneven, but they hold. Like you. Mainstream historical fact. Viking ships were marvels of engineering for their time, clinker built, with overlapping planks for flexibility, shallow keels for beach landings, and both sails and oars to adapt to conditions. These designs allowed them to navigate not just oceans but shallow rivers, making their reach astonishingly wide. Historians still debate whether the legendary sunstones they supposedly used for navigation in cloudy weather were real or poetic exaggeration, but either way, it makes for a great sea tale. Ivar plops down next to you, looking tired in that I've been steering for hours and haven't blinked since dawn sort of way. He chews on a piece of dried fish with the grim resolve of someone pretending it's delicious. You ever think about quitting? You ask, half serious. All the time. He grunts. Then I remember back home. I'd be mending nets for my brother-in-law. Here, I get to be cold, hungry, and occasionally stabbed. It's a better story. You laugh, because he's not wrong. You spend the afternoon sketching in the dirt between deck planks with a bit of charcoal. A house, maybe. A proper oven. A tiny goat wearing a helmet. You're not sure why. Maybe it's an idea. Maybe it's just your brain leaking out the quiet way. Quirky tidbit. Some Viking warriors are believed to have worn odd, symbolic accessories bare. Claws bore tusks, carved runes believed to imbue them with strength or protection. There's a particularly strange account of a chieftain's prized goat, who wore a bronze-plated headpiece during ceremonies. Historians still argue whether this was battle symbolism or just deeply committed animal pageantry. The mist rolls in thicker by evening. You can barely see the waves, but you feel them gentle, rolling, rhythmic, like breathing. Someone starts humming near the bow, a soft, low tune that spreads like candlelight. Another voice joins, then another. You don't know the words, but you hum anyway. It's not about lyrics. It's about something older, bone deep and salt-washed. A song to hold the silence back. A song to stay afloat. That night, you don't lie on the deck. You curl up in the hull, tucked beside a crate that smells faintly of beeswax, wrapped in your freshly mended cloak. You run your thumb along the spoon's handle. And for a moment, a quiet, improbable moment, you realize you're not waiting for something anymore. Not waiting to go home. Not waiting for a battle to start or end. Not waiting to feel like you belong. You're already here. Maybe you'll bake again tomorrow. Maybe you'll trade a pie for a story. Maybe you'll learn the names of the chickens. But tonight, you sleep not like a stowaway or a soldier or even a baker. You sleep like someone who's found the shape of their life floating just above the tide. The chickens start clucking again just before dawn. Predictable. Noisy creatures like feathered alarm bells with no snooze button. You stretch, joints clicking like old wooden hinges, and pull your cloak tighter against the morning chill. The ship is anchored now in a narrow inlet, its hull gently knocking against the lapping tide. A jagged coastline looms just beyond pine trees, crowding the rocky edge like curious giants. You squint toward land. Another village, a cluster of smoke signals breakfast fires, or signal fires. Hard to tell, still, the smell of something roasting travels on the breeze, and your stomach sits up to pay attention. You gather your few things: spoon, satchel, a half-scribbled charcoal goat hand, join the others disembarking. Your boots crunch against damp sand. It's soft, clumpy, flecked with bits of shell and salt-gritted driftwood. The villagers don't look particularly alarmed. That's always a plus. They watch the Viking crew file up from the shore, most with curiosity, some with guarded eyes. You smile, which earns you a cautious nod from a woman cradling a basket of seaweed. The language here is unfamiliar, but gestures do most of the work. Someone offers fish. Someone else points you toward a communal hearth. You settle onto a low bench, hands outstretched toward the warmth. And there, against all odds, you feel like a guest. Not an invader. Not a drifter. Just welcome. Mainstream historical fact. Not all Viking landings were raids. In fact, trade settlements and peaceful exchanges were incredibly common. Archaeological evidence shows extensive networks of barter: furs, amber, salt, silver, even luxury, glassware. Coastal villages often adapted to the Viking presence, sometimes even relying on their visits. Historians still debate whether some so-called raids were actually broken trade deals gone wrong, or were dramatized by later chroniclers for political purposes, while the warriors fan out, looking for trade or maybe just somewhere to stretch their legs. You offer to help bake. A woman with salt grey braids gives you a flat stone and a lump of sticky dough. It smells faintly of herbs, something green and lemony. You shape it gently with your fingers, your mind drifting back to your old kitchen, your cracked hearth, the good-natured scolding of your neighbor for burning the crust again. Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists once uncovered a Viking-age hearth buried near Dublin that held the remains of flatbread seasoned with wild garlic and crushed shellfish. Theories range from an experimental recipe to someone lost a bet. Historians still argue whether Viking food habits leaned more toward necessity or culinary ambition. Either way, someone clearly liked bold flavors. As the bread sizzles on the stone, you take in your surroundings, smoke curling lazily up into the brightening sky, a child chasing a chicken that looks suspiciously familiar, a fisherman humming a tune that makes Iva pause and smile. You breathe in deeply. Not every journey is a quest. Not every life is about glory. Some lives are made in quiet corners, in laughter shared over a pot of stew, in spoons carved with patient hands, in crusts that burn just slightly too much but are still eaten anyway. You look out to the ship. It rocks gently at anchor, sails furled, crew scattered. There's no rush to leave, not this time. You're not sure how long you'll stay in this village. A few days, a season, maybe longer. Maybe this is just another stop, or maybe it's home. Either way, you're not afraid of what comes next, because now you know you're not a mistake in someone else's story. You're not a half warrior, half farmer misfit lost between roles. You're you. A Viking, yes, but also a baker, a carver, a traveler who never liked fighting but found meaning anyway. And the world is wide enough for all of that. The fire dies down to glowing embers as the stars blink awake above the inlet. The water laps against the hull like a slow heartbeat. You lie back on the shore, soft sand beneath your head, your cloak drawn up around your chin. The bread you helped bake still lingers on your tongue, warm, herbal. Just a touch burned on the bottom. Perfect. Your eyes trace the dark silhouettes of pines above, swaying ever so slightly in the breeze. A gentle hush falls over the village, broken only by the soft cluck of a stubborn chicken roosting in someone's cart. The others are quiet, tucked into borrowed beds, woven blankets rising and falling with sleep. And you're not cold. You're not lonely. You're not waiting anymore. Each breath sinks you deeper into the sand, into stillness. The scent of sea air and warm ash fills your chest. A life you never meant to find is now wrapped around you like a second skin, familiar, snug, earned. The stars are just stories, scattered in the sky, twinkling like old runes half remembered. But here, under this sky, on this strange, peaceful shore, your story fits. It doesn't shout, it doesn't conquer. It just rests, quietly, beautifully. So let go now. Let the soft hum of water and wind rock you gently. Let the spoon rest. Let the tide carry your dreams. You've found your place, and it's enough. Good night. The afternoon settles over the village like a woolen blanket, warm, slightly scratchy, and heavy with the promise of more chores. You've finished your stew, handed your bowl to a passing child who promptly dropped it and pretended he didn't, and wandered back outside where the light has taken on that golden, syrupy quality that always makes you feel like you should be lying in a field somewhere, contemplating your place in the universe. But no, the goats have escaped again. You hear them before you see them, cloven hooves clattering where they absolutely should not be. Little bleats of triumph, and the unmistakable sound of something valuable being chewed. By the time you turn the corner, behind the longhouse, it's already too late. One goat is proudly standing on top of a woodpile like a tiny horned warlord. Another is halfway through what looks like a boot. The third, you swear this one plans things, is eyeing your laundry line. With malicious intent, you groan. Of course, they picked today. Of course no one else is around to stop them. Chasing goats isn't heroic, but it is acrobatic. You lunge for the laundry line just as the ringleader leaps toward it. You win barely. The goat hits the ground unimpressed. You give it a look that says, "We will not do again." And it responds by peeing on a cabbage. Here's a mainstream historical fact to add dignity to this nonsense. Vikings kept goats not just for milk, but also for meat, hides, and wool substitutes. Goat milk was a key part of the diet, especially when other livestock weren't available. They were hardy creatures, well suited to the rocky Nordic terrain, and absolute menaces when bored. Eventually, with the help of a very enthusiastic 7-year-old wielding a stick shaped like Thor's hammer, you wrangle the goats back into their pen. One tries to escape again, but you head it off with a sudden noise that might be described as a battle cry. Or possibly just a tired yelp. Victory is yours. Sort of. You wipe your hands on your tunic and scan the sky. A few wisps of cloud have started creeping in, dragging the temperature down with them. A faint breeze picks up from the east, smelling of pine and damp soil. With a shifting, probably rain by morning. Good thing you're not sailing anywhere. You're not even pretending to care about sailing today. As you check the pen one more time for weak spots, because yes, these goats absolutely haven't. Escape committee, you catch a glint of color near the fence. A flower. Not just any flower, though. It's a rare mountain bloom that shouldn't be growing here at all. And right next to it, half buried in the dirt, is a shard of something shiny. You crouch down and brush it off. It's part of a brooch bronze, with hints of blue enamel and a sunburst pattern along the edge. Looks old. Older than the village. This is your fringe fact. Buried beneath many Viking settlements are the remains of older, pre-Viking communities, some stretching back to the Bronze Age. Artifacts often surfaced during daily chores, revealing glimpses of long-forgotten people and gods. Some believed finding such objects was a sign that the land remembered you, or was warning you. You hold the brooch in your palm, feeling the cool weight of it. It hums with the quiet tension of history of something beautiful and broken. Accidentally unearthed during goat strangling, you pocket it carefully, already thinking of how to ask the old man Scully about it. He's got a hoard of strange tales and facts rattling around in his head, and if anyone would know where this came from, it's him, assuming he's sober. But you'll save that for later. Right now, it's time to help stack firewood. You sigh and trudge toward the pile by the east fence, where a few others have already begun the laborious process of turning a heap of logs into something vaguely organized. No one really talks, they just grunt in acknowledgement and toss you a piece of wood, which you nearly drop because apparently your arms are still made of stew and goat trauma. You fall into the rhythm, lift, stack, shift, repeat. The wood smells sharp and clean, pine and birch mostly. Occasionally someone mutters a complaint about a knot, or swears revenge on a splinter. No one seems particularly cheerful about the job, but it's steady work, simple, and there's a strange comfort in doing something so utterly mundane while surrounded by people who aren't trying to be heroic either. One of the women next to you nods at the growing stack and says, "This'll keep us warm if winter shows up angry again." You nod. Or if Bjorn burns down the smokehouse again. She snorts. One time, he did that one time, and told everyone the gods were testing our fireproofing. To be fair, we were overdue for a test. You share a brief laugh then. Go back to stacking. Another fact to chew on while your shoulders protest. Historians still argue whether the average Viking household kept one centralized fire pit or multiple small ones per building section. Some excavations show communal longhouses, while others suggest more segmented layouts with private spaces. Either way, firewood was essential fuel for warmth, cooking, and even metalwork. You glance down at your hands. They're covered in dirt and bark and a suspicious black smudge that might be old pitch. There's a splinter in your thumb. Your back aches in that very specific "I am not a hero, I am a villager" way. But as you set another log into place and hear someone whistle a tune behind you, you realize something. You don't actually mind any of this. You don't need salt songs or saga lines. You need warm stew, stubborn goats, and firewood stacked high enough to laugh at the wind. The stew smells stronger now, tugging at your senses with every step as you make your way back toward the longhouse hearth. The wind teases curls of steam from the chimney like a lazy smoke signal. Lunch is almost ready. Proceed with caution. You pass Hilda on the path, her hands stained purple to the wrists. She grins at you, teeth a little too white against her dye-blotched face. The berries fought back, she says, as if that explains everything. You don't ask questions. Instead, you enter the longhouse where warmth instantly envelopes you. The fire pit is crackling merrily in the center, guarded on all sides by flat stones and cooking pots. A few children are sitting cross-legged nearby, poking at scraps of wood, pretending they're swords, or possibly enchanted tree spirits depending on which saga they've half listened to this week. The stewpot is hanging over the flames, and someone has clearly been in charge of it, but that someone is not currently here. You eye it with suspicion. There's a film on top, which might be melted fat or might be the beginning of something sentient. Hard to say. Here's a mainstream historical fact to chew on. Viking meals were typically simple and filling. Stews were staples, easy to make, easy to stretch, and forgiving of creative ingredients. Think turnips, onions, grains, herbs, and whatever protein could be spared. Sometimes that was fish. Sometimes it was squirrel. Sometimes you didn't ask. You grab the long-handled ladle and give the stew a stir. It gurgles approvingly. Chunks of barley. Something orange, please let it be carrot. And wisps of green herbs rise and fall like seaweed. Just as you're about to taste it, someone coughs behind you. It's Bjorn. Great. Bjorn is one of those people who somehow manages to make everything a performance. He holds out a wooden bowl with the gravity of a royal decree and says, "Ladle me up, noble cook." You glare at him. You know I'm not actually on lunch duty today, but you're holding the ladle. You consider bonking him with it. Instead, you ladle out a hefty scoop and drop it into his bowl with a splatter. A bit hits his tunic. He doesn't flinch. "I'll tell people this was on purpose," he says, and saunters off. You resist the urge to throw the rest of the ladle at him. You finally grab your own bowl and dip it in. It's not bad. Hearty, a bit salty, probably. Thanks to Greta's brined turnips, you settle cross-legged by the fire. The heat soaking into your back. The smell of wood smoke weaving through your hair. One of the kids starts humming a tune. Another joins in, off-key but enthusiastic. Before long, someone taps a spoon against a pot like a drum, and a slow rhythm emerges, hypnotic and silly. You sway along without meaning to. Here's your quirky fringe fact. Viking children played with carved toys, little boats, animals, swords, and mimicked adult chores in their games. They also sang songs with nonsense words to help memorize stories or pass the time. Some of these tunes have echoes in modern Nordic folk lullabies. A hush falls when Sigrid enters. She's the oldest woman in the village, which basically makes her the combined chief historian, unofficial judge, and occasional range shaman. She carries herself like every step has purpose, even when she's just coming to warm her feet. Sigrid sits across from you with a groan and dips a crust of bread into her bowl. "You're not fighting again today?" she asks, not accusing. Just curious. You shake your head. "Not unless someone tries to make me die well again." She snorts. "Good. The sheep need their dignity." You sip your stew and glance around. Outside, you can hear distant hammering. Someone's finally repairing the south fence. The sun's past its peak now, slanting golden light across the benches and highlighting dust motes in the smoky air. Inside, the longhouse settles into a rhythm, chewing, murmurs, laughter, a spoon clinking against clay. Historians still argue. Sigrid says suddenly whether we ate better than the Saxons. You raise an eyebrow. "What's the verdict?" She shrugs. "Well, we had fewer plagues, but worse bread." You both chew in silence for a moment. She continues, voice dropping into that tone that means a story is coming whether you asked for it or not. "Where I was your age, I thought I'd be a warrior too. Carve a name into the sagas. Get sung about." You glance up, curious. She never talks about her own youth. "But then I broke my ankle chasing a pig through a swamp. Got stuck there for a day. Missed the boat to Jorvik." You blink. "So," she finishes, "I stayed. Became the village ghost scolder and ear puller. Not quite saga-worthy, but it pays in fresh turnips." You try not to laugh and fail. She gives you a look, just saying there's no shame in staying home. "Not everyone's built for raids and blood oaths." "I'm built for naps," you mutter. Same thing. If you nap hard enough, you offer her another piece of bread, and she accepts it like you've gifted her a crown. The kids begin poking at the fire again. Someone spills stew. Someone else yells. A dog races through the longhouse, barking joyfully, then disappears out. The other end, you lean back, resting the bowl on your lap, and feel the weight of the day beginning to tug at your limbs. Not enough for a nap yet, but the thought lingers as the fire crackles on, and the village stirs with post-lunch restlessness. You can't help but think how strange it is that this sitting by the hearth with stew and old stories feels more heroic than anything involving swords or ships. You stretch your legs. Let your head tilt back just a little. The world doesn't need more warriors right now. It needs someone to keep the stew from burning. The sun is crawling higher now, glinting off rooftops and warming your tunic just enough to make you regret that second layer. You'd peel it off, but you're halfway to the grain shed with a basket full of drying herbs, Blue Street wool, and a fistful of bread ends you swiped for lunch. It's a look. Your next mission is straightforward: oats, or rather, making sure nobody has spilled the oats again, which happens more than it should, considering how important they are for everything from porridge to flatbread to feeding the goats, that everyone keeps pretending aren't their responsibility. The grain shed is one of the few structures with an actual door, though calling it a shed is generous. It's a glorified box with a slanted roof, high shelves, and enough dust to suffocate a dozen small spiders. You duck inside, sneezing instantly, and yep, someone's knocked over one of the bags again. Mainstream historical fact time. Grain was the backbone of Viking agriculture. Barley, rye, and oats were the most common, used for bread, beer, and gruel. Wheat was rare and expensive, basically imported gold for flour snobs. Oats were reliable, humble, the friend that never lets you down, even if they're a bit boring. At parties, you kneel beside the mess and begin scooping the loose grain back into the sack. A few mice scatter at your rival freeloaders, the lot of them. You mutter under your breath about training the cat better. Then remember the cat only shows up when fish guts are involved. Outside, you hear someone arguing in the distance. You can't make out the words, but the tone is unmistakable. To brothers fighting over whose turn it is to patch the boat hull. Again, you sigh, because your life is surrounded by chores you didn't agree to and squabbles you don't want to. Referee. But at least here in the grain shed, it's peaceful. Dusty, mouse-adjacent, sneeze-inducing peace. You finish scooping and stand, brushing oats from your knees and checking the jars of herbs on the shelf. Most of them are labeled in a scribble that only you and two other people can read. The rest are just vibes. One smells like mint and moss, another might be crushed garlic or crushed beetle. It's hard to tell. A fringe historical tidbit here. Vikings used all kinds of herbs not just for flavor, but for medicine, dyeing, and even spirit rituals. Angelica, yarrow, nettle. Mugwort many were gathered wild and stored in bundles, like the ones currently shedding crumbs in your basket. You check a sealed jar and wince at the smell. Whatever that was supposed to be, it's not anymore. As you replace it with fresh sage, your eyes land on the family ledger, just a bundle of birch bark sheets tied with twine. Every Viking farmstead had its own way of recording debts, planting, schedules and stores, some carved into wood, others used runes on bone or stone. You flip through the top sheet and pause, because someone, probably your younger brother, has drawn a very crude goat, wearing a crown and labeled it king of the storage room. You stare at it a while, then quietly shut the ledger. Historians still argue whether literacy was widespread in Norse households, or limited to elite circles and merchants. Based on this drawing, you vote very limited. Just as you're replacing the herbs, the door creaks open behind you. You jump a little and nearly drop the jar of wild thyme. It's Greta, the beekeeper's apprentice. She's holding something bundled in linen like it might explode at any moment. Is that? You start. Yes, she says grimly. Fermented. Honey bread. You wince. From last season. You wince harder. Apparently. She found it tucked behind a hive, probably by someone hoping time would improve it. It hasn't. The smell alone could qualify it as a weapon. Greta sets it on a shelf like she's putting down a cursed relic. You offer her a piece of the fresh bread you stole her, borrowed earlier, and she takes it with a nod of appreciation. You both munch in silence for a moment, pretending the rotting honey bread isn't eyeing you ominously from the corner. I think it moved, she says. It's fermenting aggressively. Greta leaves you to it. muttering something about vinegar-soaked bandages and bees that hold grudges. You make a mental note to never offend a bee again. You finally close the grain sack properly. Tie it off and prop it against the wall so the mice can't dive in again. Not that they won't try. Outside, the breeze has shifted. You step into it, letting it cool your face. Somewhere, someone is singing off-key while chopping firewood. Someone else is trying to wrangle a goat who clearly wants none of it. The longhouse chimney coughs smoke in a slow spiral. You start walking again, back toward the central fire pit. There's still lunch to help with and more soap to scrub off. Thanks to Hilda's surprise hair dye experiment earlier. You're not convinced your hands will ever be their original color again. But even as you trudge, the smell of stew reaches your nose. Rich and earthy. Probably turnip again, but hay turnips underrated. There's a strange comfort in knowing what comes next. Because even if you're not fighting battles or sailing off to raid faraway shores, you are surviving, and sometimes that means patching the grain sacks and sharing questionable bread. You stretch your arms, roll your shoulders, and blink against the sun. Another chore down. Another 100 to go. But at least the mice respect you now. Probably.